making a video. Might be pretty long.
Alright, but first you'll have to unlock your device.
Is the modern United States, about the modern United States of America, is it an evil you could say, empire? Wanted to start, say Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, in the name of Allah, Most High, most great, most gracious, most forgiving. Let's start with this. The final words of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Peace and blessings of Allah be upon him. Allah Most High be upon him. It's from my blog. Post made September 14, 2022. Copied some of this from Google. Automatic Google's or YouTube's automatic transcript. There's no justice that I can make for this topic in this short time. No words are enough to describe how valuable and how emotional these last days of the Prophet was. Sallallahu alaihi wasallam. There's no man that exists on the face of the earth, no human, no creation of Allah Most High, whose last days are more moving, more important, more valuable than the last days of the best creature on the face of the earth. Brothers and sisters in Islam, the messenger of Allah who came to all mankind, to all people, the final messenger of God Most High, the one with whom his death meant that it will mark the last time any messenger, any inspiration will come down onto earth. No more Quran, no more revelations, no more revelations, no more guidance was going to cease at the death of this final messenger. On the 12th month and the 10th year of Al-Hijrah, the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam delivered his last sermon in public to the largest amount of people. It's called the Farewell Pilgrimage, and I wonder what the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam is going to address people in this final important sermon to the public. It is a long sermon, I'm sure that you know most of it, but to highlight the most important parts of it, after praising Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, glorious and exalted He is, sending His prayers and blessings onto His messenger, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, said to them, Behold and learn these words that I'm going to tell you, and pass them on to those who are absent. Those of you who are here today, pass them on. To those who will come later. I'm going to come to that. Well, this is the translation of this video. Is not perfect. Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam commanded him, lend a very attentive ear, told them they are not to practice ever again into the land of the Arabs and the Medians and its surroundings. He also said that Iblis has given up on causing people in these lands to make shirk as a whole, as a nation. So no Muslims protect the Medina from disbelievers, non-Muslims from coming into the cities of Allah Most High. And these places will be protected. majority of my inter be careful about the small sins. Just Allah wiped them out. Alright. I wanted to get at this part. Dressed as the Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam addressed us in the form of the advice of abandoning nationalism and racism, or different colors, or different backgrounds, or different genders. Well, genders. Instead, attribute Jah Alaihi in relation to tribalism and nationalism is long gone for me, and I placed it underneath my feet today. He said, leave it for it stinks. It's a stinking carcass, and I placed it beneath my feet. Do not remember the state of Islam could not flourish until Rasul al-Salam broke. He was the enemy between the Muslims and made them brothers and sisters. You're my Ummah. For the first time, a nation has been called Ummah. Do you know where Ummah is derived from? My brothers and sisters, Arabic, the terminology is not fair, because the word before it's called, that means, right, means when you make a center of attention or objective before yourself, and when the mother gives birth to her child, all the center of attention is on the mother, right? And when the child is born, the baby is looking for his mother. The whole world stops because the mother has given birth. She was called, my brothers and sisters were called by the Prophet, means that you might as well be from one mother. We are truly like from one mother, so we should treat each other as such. The Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam went on advising, said to the men, look after your women, care for your women, do not oppress your women, be dutiful towards them, and you will know the hadith of the Prophet, the best among you when your men is the one best to his wife. I am the best among you to my wife. Why is the Rasulullah giving these strict advice in his last sermon? Yet today we find many Muslims not taking them as a very serious matter. Because after being one Ummah and adhering as one unity, he knows that our generations and our children and our Ummah, generation after generation, cannot flourish, cannot be leaders without looking after the most important educational institution that exists for them. And she is their mother, for she spends most of the time with them. And how perfect is the law between you and I, that I find my daughter and son, my children, they learn from their mother quicker than what they learn from me. I think you can agree with me. There's something about the voice of the mother. She says a few words and they've memorized it, mashallah. Something about them, and men complain that women talk a lot. Is that not right? When they talk a lot, it's because they give a lot of detailed explanation to children who also talk a lot. This is a positive thing, actually. We should not look at it as a negative thing. So much importance about caring and nurturing. This mother, for Allah created her from you, and she is an Aman. When Allah created the woman from the rib of Adam alayhi wasalam, it kind of means trust. And he finds Adam was incomplete, and he finds his completeness with his wife, and his wife finds her completeness with her husband. We found We find our completeness with our mothers, with our daughters, with our sisters, and they find their completeness with their fathers, their brothers, their sons, and husbands. If we don't do that, then we can never prosper as an Ummah and as humanity. All the ever important information and advice that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam told us about in his final sermon. Why, such simple matters to us today, but they are so huge. So huge. Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam needed to leave it with us as a bequest. It is not the result. Most of our countries today, third world countries dying of hunger and starvation, poverty, and oppression, is a result not primarily because of usury and interest. Yes, it is. And the leading money makers are the capitalists, and they survive and thrive on interest. He had to break one thing, and that is one thing very quickly. That is the practice of usury, because they used to charge them interest. This is how they kept the war when war was going. They used to supply them with weapons, and when they couldn't pay them off, they said to say, "Don't worry, you can just pay us later with interest." This oppression creates classes of people and hierarchies and creates slavery. Said, leave it, usury, and repeating the brotherhood, saying, "Behold, the blood, the honor, and the wealth, the property of every Muslim is as sacred as this day of ours, is this month of ours, as this holy city of ours, if not more, even more sacred than the Kaaba itself. The blood, the honor, and the property of the Muslims towards one another." He gave more advice along these lines, but the most highlighted advices are adhering to Allah, making sure brotherhood and sisterhood in Islam, caring for our women, and looking after the honor, the blood, and the wealth of one another. These advices were simple, yet the Muslims today, how far have we gone off track in these matters? We ask Allah to forgive us and set us on a straight path again, and to bring prosperity and leadership to the ones who will inherit this earth in righteousness. His last sermon, by pointing his finger upwards, and pointing to the people, saying, "Bear witness that I have informed them. Bear witness that I have informed them." He kept repeating it several times until the people wept. They felt the strain, the tension. So, Alaihi Wasallam, Holy Quran 77 for 88, 55, 56. It was like humanity. It was in the last juz. But of course, only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows. Surah 77, both sent forth. Translation by Maulana Muhammad Ali. Well, on that day to the rejectors, walk on to that which you called a lie. Walk on to the shadows having 3 branches, neither cool nor availing against the frame. It sends up sparks like palaces, as if they were tawny camels. Woe on the day to the rejectors. According to Aib, the address here is to the people of the cross, the believers in Trinity, and this may be the reason for calling their punishment the Falafi Shaub, shadow having 3 branches. The word zil used here means properly shade or light of the sun without the rays, but the word is extensively used to carry a number of other significances, such as covering, protection, a planet for or easy state of life. The 3 branches of it are the 3 characteristics thereof stated in the verses that follow. They reject the truth and seek comfort and ease and material benefits. They are given a shade, but it does serve the purpose of shade. It is devoid of the coolness of shade. They cannot find solace in it, nor does it avail them against flames which stand here for the stresses of life. More than this, what they mistook for ease and plenty is itself a source of distress. Sparks arise therefrom, not the tiny sparks of an ordinary fire, but sparks big as palaces. In fact, the very palaces which they make for their comfort turn into sparks, which set fire to all around them. Perhaps there is a deeper reference here to the modern implements of destruction on account of their magnitude and extensive destructive effect. These sparks are further compared to tawny camels, which is true not only as regards their color, but also because of the succession with which these sparks follow one another, like camels walking one after another in a line. This is the commentary of some of the commentary of the verses 30, 33. So you can see what I wrote a bit here. May Allah forgive us for our sins and trespasses, and may we do good to others and the environment. Even if we give up a lot of things and struggle in the way of righteousness, there are always going to be people who are probably doing more, struggling harder. And it may not even be by their own hands, but because of the inequality of the world. It's like there's just so much drama all the time that are in our country. Can't live without it. Can't accept anything against themselves. Like they are so high and mighty. How hard do we even have it here in these days? But yet, yes, our government and others want us to hide the truth of the Quran. Never have seen the Quran before on a U.S. bookshelf, and still have yet to have seen one. And the truth of doing good deeds, that there is a purpose in life and so much more. They cover up, and it's the whole truth as it says, everything we do, say, and possibly even think. All will be brought forth if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would not forgive us. Of our sins and bad things. Signs of the hour, the final hour, the day of judgment. Comments. One day your actions will visit you, so don't be surprised when you see them. Seek help with Allah, knowing without a shadow of a doubt that He hears you and will answer you. We are products of our past. We don't have to be prisoners of it. O servant of Allah, don't grieve, as Allah is always aware. Even if the whole world turns against you, as long as you obey Him, He will never forsake you. Surah 79, 80, 81. Surah 83, Default and Duty. Woe to the cheaters when they take their measure of their dues from men, take it fully. When they measure out to others or weigh out for them, they give less than is due. Do they not think that they will be raised again to a mighty day, the day when men will stand before the Lord of the worlds. Nay, surely the record of the wicked is in the prison, referring to the written book or record which they can't escape from. It is a written book. Woe on that day to the rejectors, who gives the lie to the day of judgment. And none gives a lie to it but every exceeder of limits, every sinful one. When our message are recited to him, he says, stories of those of yore. Nay, whether what they earned is rust upon their hearts. Nay, surely they are that day debarred from their Lord. Surah 85 Al-Buruj, the stars, this one are him, but heaven full of stars, and the promised day, and the bearer of witness, and that to which witness is born. Destruction overtake the companions of the trench, the fire fed with fuel. When they sit by it, and they are witnesses of what they do with the believers, and they punish them for naught but that they believed in Allah, the Mighty, the Praised, whose is the kingdom of the heavens and the earth, and Allah is witness over all things. Those who persecute believing men and believing women and repent not, theirs is a chastisement of hell, and theirs the chastisement of burning. Those who believe and do good, theirs are gardens wherein flow rivers. That is the great achievement. Surely the grip of thy Lord is severe. Surely it is who creates first and reproduces, and he is the forgiving, the loving, Lord of the throne of power, the glorious, doer of what he intends. Does not there come to be the story of the hosts of Pharaoh and Thamud? Nay, those who disbelieve give the lie, and Allah encompasses them on all sides. Nay, it is a glorious Quran and a guarded tablet. Before Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, gaining knowledge is incumbent upon my ummah. Knowledge. Seeking knowledge is a duty upon every Muslim, and he who imparts knowledge is a duty upon every Muslim. That's the main thing. And he who imparts, willfully, he who imparts knowledge to those who do not deserve it is like one who puts a necklace of jewels, pearls, and gold around the neck of swines. Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, do not seek knowledge in order to show off in front of the scholars or to argue with the foolish, and do not choose the best seat in a gathering due to it, i.e., the knowledge which you have learned, for whoever does that, the fire awaits him. Allah, grant me benefit in what you have taught me, and teach me useful knowledge, and provide me with knowledge that will benefit me. I said, Allah, teach him the book, i.e., the understanding of the knowledge of the Quran. The keys of the unseen are 5, and he recited, verily, the knowledge of Allah, of the hour is with Allah alone. Narrated by Abu Hurairah that the Messenger of Allah Most High Allah, Alaihi Wasallam, said, "Whoever takes the path upon which to obtain knowledge, Allah makes the path to paradise easy for him." It's also narrated by Anas bin Malik that the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, "Whoever goes out seeking knowledge, then he is in Allah's cause until he returns." It was narrated by Abdullah bin Sakbara, narrated that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, "Whoever seeks knowledge, he is atoning for what has passed of sins while doing so." And it was narrated by Abu Hurairah that the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, "Whoever is asked about some knowledge that he knows when he conceals it, he will be bridled with bridle of fire." We have in Matthew of the Bible. Matthew 5, the Beatitudes. On seeing the multitudes, he went up on a mountain, and when he was seated, his disciples came to him. Then he opened his mouth and taught them, saying, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall obtain mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called sons of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when they revile and persecute you, and say all kinds of evil against you falsely, for my sake. Rejoice and be exceedingly glad, for great is your reward in heaven, for so they persecuted the prophets who were before you." Believers are salt and light. Verse 13, "You are the salt of the earth, but if the salt loses its flavor, how shall it be seasoned? It is then good for nothing but to be thrown out and trampled underfoot by men." 14, "You are the light of the world, a city that is set on a hill that cannot be hidden. Nor do they light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on a lampstand, and it gives light to all who are in the house. Let your light so shine before men, that they may see your good works and glorify your Father in heaven." Christ fulfills the law. "Do not think that I came to destroy the law of the prophets. I did not come to destroy, but to fulfill." "For assuredly I say to you, till heaven and earth pass away, one jot or one tittle will by no means pass from the law till all is fulfilled." Whoever therefore breaks one of the least of these commandments and teaches men so shall be called least in the kingdom of heaven. But whoever does and teaches them, he shall be called great in the kingdom of heaven. For I say to you that unless your righteousness exceeds the righteousness of the scribes and Pharisees, who will by no means enter the kingdom of heaven. And that's verses are, topics are murder begins in the heart, adultery in the heart, marriage is sacred and binding, Jesus forbids oaths, go the second mile, love your enemies, do good to please God. It has the so-called Lord's Prayer. I really like chapters 6 and 7. Continuing on, and in the 2 centuries after the founding, the American Republic expanded across the continent and advanced to become one of the greatest and remarkable civilizations ever to exist on Earth. We Americans are truly a blessed people. We are fortunate to be alive now at the height of our American civilization. We have inherited a grand legacy. Of course, should judge through different eyes. That's just of course, a secular viewpoint and money, viewpoint. But there is a sense across this land that something is wrong, that our country is changing, and we're not for the better. There is a sense that all is not well in the U.S. As we look around us, many are feeling an uneasiness as if something is being lost. We feel the rot that has set in. We see around us the corruption. We feel the decline and the smell the decay that is advancing on us and affecting our daily lives. Our old values and way of life seem to be slipping away as new alien values and new diminished way of life take hold. Forces that are mysterious and beyond our control seem to be determining the course of events and making changes that are altering our nation beyond recognition from their old America we knew and loved. Yes, we are still a blessed people, fortunate to live in a prosperous nation founded on great principles. But unfortunately, we Americans have been cursed with a monetary system that was purposely designed to siphon off the wealth of our nation and concentrate it into the grasping hands of a small number of usurers and speculators. This monetary system was put in place a century ago under false pretenses. Its architects made grand promises that their system would end the cycle of boom and bust that had been plaguing American families, farms, and businesses. They designed a system that appeared to be aligned with American values, but this was a deception. The Federal Reserve Act of 1913 was a rejection of American values. It put in place a system that was unaccountable to the people, without checks and balances, in which concentrated power into the hands of a few who were given the authority to make decisions in secrecy that affect the lives of all of us. This system was purposefully designed to cooperate without the consent of the governed. Since the founding of the Fed, we've lurched from economic boom and bust at regular intervals. These boom and busts have been just as chaotic and caused just as much misery for the American people as they did prior to the founding of the Fed, the current Fed. One economic crisis has followed another. The past 20 years seen us lurch from boom to bust over and over again. Since the crash of 2007, we have seen working Americans lose ground while a handful of rich people grow ever richer. The rich have never been richer. The wealth gap in 2015 between the rich and the poor was greater than any time in our history, greater than during the Gilded Age or the Roaring '20s. A small group of rich people is monopolizing the wealth of our nation like no other time in the history of the Republic. Since the founding of the Federal Reserve, we have seen our industries that have been built up over generations flee from our shores. We've watched the greatest middle class in the history of the world collapse around us. More and more of us struggle to maintain the same level of prosperity as the generations that came before us. We've seen the prosperity of the American nation concentrated more and more into grasping, rent-seeking, interest-collecting hands of a transnational elite that we share little in common with in outlook or in lifestyle. Since the founding of the Federal Reserve, our nation has been drawn into overseas wars, one after the other, again and again, which have taken the lives of hundreds of thousands of Americans, citizens whose blood has been spilled on foreign soil. Not to mention all the foreigners that have been killed. After all these wars, we still do not have peace. Our media alarms us day in and day out about enemies on the other side of the planet who seek to do us harm. Since the founding of the Federal Reserve, we have gone from being a creditor nation into becoming one of the biggest debtor nations in the history of the world. Our nation is being buried under a national debt that increases exponentially year upon year, which can never be paid back. I'll get into that. Before the founding of the Federal Reserve, we had no income tax. Now our tax burden grows heavier and heavier as our debt burden expands. Our government taxes our wages to pay back huge debts owed to banks and foreign nations. Well, actually, now, 239 years after the founders of this nation took up arms and declared their independence from a tyrannical king, our government, which was designed to serve us, spying on our every move, collecting and storing information on us, attempting to do the very things that the American colonists rebelled against. As an American citizen, surely you must feel that something is wrong, that we've lost our way as a nation and as a people. But what is the cause of our misfortunes? We do not find answers from our political leaders, our media, or our academics. We have been corrupted, and are servants of the very system that was put in place a century ago. In 1912, during the height of the debate about monetary policy in the U.S. before the Federal Reserve Act was passed, a Midwestern attorney named Alfred Owen Crozier published the book titled U.S. Money and First Corporation Currency. In his book, Crozier suggested that the panic of 1907, which had caused such fear and misery, had been engineered by Wall Street bankers to scare the government and the people into accepting the monetary reforms that the bankers craved. The bankers had a plan called the Aldrich Plan, named after its backer, Senator Nelson Aldrich, to create a central bank that they said was put a stop to crises like the Panic of 1907. Crozier called the Aldrich Plan a money twist that would give Wall Street control of the bank reserves of the American people. He warned us that Wall Street bankers were attempting to seize control of the American money supply for private profit and power. If they were successful, no good would come of it. For the workers, farmers, and small businessmen, Crozier warned that if the bankers were successful, the United States government would be corrupted and our economy would fall under the control of the corporations that would spring up around Wall Street's central bank. Crozier warned us that our government would become subservient to Wall Street banks and our corporations. Crozier wrote that if Wall Street got its way, we shall have only corporate currency, and government of the corporations, by the corporations, and for the corporations, a soulless corporate republic. You can monarchy. Some of his plan, his hope was that his plan would ensure against politics or partisanship and monetary policy because both parties would have members serving that could block by public publicity any attempt to improperly use the powers of the council. Imagine his council would guard against Wall Street influences and instead create monetary policy to serve the interests of the public, commerce, and the nation at large. In the Crozier plan, every state had representation, and thus Crozier imagined his council would establish a sound, stable, permanent, and elastic system of banking and currency adapted to the changing needs of the country. The council would protect the country and commerce from the panics and evils of excessive currency and credit, inflations, and contractions. While perhaps Crozier's plan for monetary reform was not perfect, what he envisioned was a government body created under American principles, separation of powers, checks and balances, and accountability to the people. Unfortunately, the monetary reform we got in 1913 and under 1913 under the Federal Reserve Act was in no way, shape, or form designed using American principles. Quite the opposite. The system we got is not subject to a separation of powers and checks and balances. It is in no way accountable to the people. The system we got was designed to act independently from the will of the people and of our representatives in Congress. Policy was not intended to be made transparently, but in secret behind closed doors. Accountability was not to the American people, but to Wall Street banks. The system we have today was a run Crozier warned us against, a corporate monetary system controlled by private bankers, designed not to serve American citizens, but to fleece us. The origins of the Federal Reserve System were known to all but a few Americans until recently, when writers, journalists, and members of the Fed began openly discussing the institution's secretive inception. After the Panic of 1907, Congress formed the National Monetary Commission to search for solutions that would avoid another banking collapse. Senator Nelson Aldrich was a founding member of this council, which he took on a trip to Europe to study the central banks there. Aldrich had deep ties to the New York banking clique. He was a personal friend of J.P. Morgan, and Aldrich's daughter was married to John T. Rockefeller Jr. Upon his return from Europe, Aldrich organized a meeting at the exclusive Jekyll Island Club on the Georgia coast. In November of 1910, a group of men, all with ties to Wall Street banks, arrived at Jekyll Island wearing disguises to keep the press from knowing who they were. The men assembled at Jekyll Island were Abram P. Andrew, Assistant Secretary of the Treasury, Henry P. Davidson, a J.P. Morgan Senior Partner, Charles D. Norton, President of J.P. Morgan's First National Bank of New York, Benjamin Strong, a close Morgan friend and Vice President of Bankers Trust Company, Frank A. Vanderlip, President of National City Bank, and German citizen Paul M. Wahlberg, a partner in Kuhn, Loeb & Co. Company. In a February 12, 2012 article in Bloomberg News, Gregory D.L. Morris described the meeting. Of course, the Jekyll Island Conference, which met that month, was dodgy even by the standards of the Gilded Age. A self-selected handful of plutocrats secretly meeting at a private resort island to draw up a new framework for the nation's banking system. The Jekyll Island collaborators knew that public reports of their meeting would scupper their plans. The idea of senior officials from the Treasury, Congress, major banks, and brokerages, along with one foreign national, slipping off to design a new world order, struck generations of Americans as distasteful at best and undemocratic at worst. and would have been similarly received at the time. So the meeting of the minds was planned under the ruse of a gentleman's duck hunting expedition. These men knew that a popular spirit of reform was in the air. American people wanted change. They wanted something done about the booms and busts and bank failures that had been plaguing the country. The men at Jekyll Island wanted a central bank along the lines of the Bank of England and the other central banks of Europe. But Americans had long distrusted central banks. 3 times before, a central bank had been set up in the United States, and 3 times before they were shut down. Allegations were made that these central banks were engaged in fraud and corruption, that they concentrated wealth and power into the hands of their shareholders, that they were servants of plutocrats and foreign financiers. The Bank of North America, the first Bank of the United States, and the second Bank of the United States had each been formed and later shut down. President Andrew Jackson famously clashed the second Bank of the United States in what was called the Bank War. The bank, Mr. Van Buren, was trying to kill me, but I shall kill it, Jackson wrote to his former Secretary of State. Jackson won the Bank War and in 1836 ended the charter of the Second Bank of the United States. He killed it. 74 years later, the bankers were once again making their move to seize control of the issuance and volume of the American money supply. They devised the Aldrich Plan, which placed the money supply under the control of the largest Wall Street banks. But they had to appease popular sentiment, so it made their monetary reform appear decentralized and under government oversight. The system placed 12 federal reserve banks in regions distributed across the country in San Francisco, Atlanta, Richmond, Chicago, Dallas, Philadelphia, Cleveland, Boston, Kansas City, St. Louis, Minneapolis, and New York. The 12 banks were organized as private corporations, with board members selected by private banks that owned stock in the regional Federal Reserve banks. The Federal Reserve Bank shareholders earn a guaranteed 6% dividend on their stock. Even foreign-owned bank branches in the regions can be member banks. These 12 Federal Reserve banks control the money supply in their regions. They increase or contract the amount of money from their member banks here have available to them for lending to businesses, governments, and the public. They are wholly owned and operated by private bankers. And with New York being home to Wall Street and the world's largest banks, the Federal Reserve Bank of New York is far and away the most powerful of the Federal Reserve's regional banks. The amount of assets it controls dwarfs that of the other regional banks. The Federal Reserve Bank of New York is the nexus of power over the American money supply. No starker example of the fact that the banker Jamie Dimon was serving on the board of the Federal Reserve Bank of New York during the 2007 financial crisis, while also serving as the president, chairman, and chief CEO of J.P. Morgan Chase, Wall Street's largest bank. While Dimon was serving on the board of the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, J.P. Morgan Chase received more than $390 million in emergency loans from the Federal Reserve. How did this get passed by Congress? To get it passed, the men at Jekyll Island had to give their system the appearance of government control. They put the regional banks under the oversight of the Federal Reserve Board of Governors in Washington, D.C. The Board of Governors sets monetary policies and oversees the regional banks. Members of the Board of Governors are appointed by the President of the United States and approved by the Senate. By having the President and Senate appoint the board, the men of Jekyll Island give the Federal Reserve System the appearance of being a government institution that is controlled by elected representatives of the American public. But the goal of the bankers was for the Federal Reserve System to operate independently from the will of the people and from elected politicians who might be influenced by public pressure. The architects of the Federal Reserve designed a system so that monetary policy decisions will not be approved by the president or anyone else in the executive or legislative branches of government. The Federal Reserve did not receive funding appropriated by Congress, and the terms of the members of the Board of Governors span multiple presidential and congressional terms. The only power elected officials have over the Federal Reserve System is the power to select their 7 members of the Board of Governors every 14 years in staggered terms. The chairman of the board can be called before congressional committees and ask questions which he or she can answer or not, but otherwise the members of the board have a free hand to make decisions that affect the lives of hundreds of millions of people without oversight by anyone. In 2000, on PBS's NewsHour, Alan Greenspan, who served as Fed chairman from 1987 to 2006, clarified the relationship between the government and the Fed. Well, first of all, the Federal Reserve is an independent agency, and that means basically that there is no other agency or of government which can overrule actions that we take. Basically, the Fed can operate freely without transparency nor accountability. No one can overrule his actions. How does the president choose whom to appoint the Board of Governors? Well, the bankers give a list of a few of their own for the president to choose from. These people are always insiders. People have spent their lives connected to the high finance as Wall Street investment bankers, or as economists who have spent their careers promoting the interests of high finance. The argument given in 1913, in which you can still read in the opinion pages of the newspapers today, is that the Fed must remain independent of congressional influence, so that its financial decisions are not influenced by partisan politics. The bankers do not want Congress meddling in their affairs. The argument was that monetary decisions must be made on sound economics and should not be subordinate to members of Congress who are up for election every 2 years. The bankers insist that monetary policy must be free from the interests and concerns of representatives elected by the American people. Article 1, Section 8, Clause 5 of the U.S. Constitution, called the Coinage Clause, states, "The Congress shall have power to coin money, regulate the value thereof, and of foreign coin." The Constitution makes Congress the body that regulates the money supply, not private bankers or the executive branch. By passing the Federal Reserve Act, Congress delegated away its constitutional authority to private bankers, or giving the executive branch the power to appoint members of the Federal Reserve Board. Congress neutered itself of its constitutional responsibility to regulate our money. Many people today believe that monetary policy is far too important a matter to be left in the hands of elected congressmen. But if monetary decisions are too important to be left to our elected representatives, what about other important decisions, such as the decision to go to war? Isn't going to war just as important as deciding what interest rates should be? Under the logic of the bankers, we should create a board to decide when we go to war and not leave this important decision to our elected representatives. Following the example of the Fed, a war board would be created made up of members chosen by the top companies in the military industrial complex. This war board should be given the decision to take the country to war in secret and without oversight and without meddling from people worried about electoral cycles. Of course, following the Fed's example, it would never be called a war board. It would be called the National Peace Board or the Federal Defense Board or something other Orwellian euphemism. Under the Fed's logic, why should any important decision at all be left to Congress? Isn't the whole point of the electoral cycle to make our representatives accountable to the public so that we can throw them out of office and replace them if they are making decisions that are adversely affecting our lives? Congress was designed by the founders to represent the interests of the states and of the American people at large. Before the 17th Amendment was ratified in 1913, senators were appointed by state legislators to represent in the federal government the interests of the states. Congress members in the House of Reps then and now are directly elected by the people in their districts to give we the people our most direct voice in the federal government. Congress represents us for better or worse. It is the voice of the people and of the states and the federal government. Yet it is often maligned in our media while the executive branch amasses more and more power. So true. And money is corrupt. Corrupting our government so much. Basically is a war board made up of the top companies in the military industrial complex. Is there not? If you know, you know. Under the current monetary system, when monetary policy is set by the Fed results in economic hardships for the American people, we use the power of the ballot box to throw the bums out of Congress and throw the bums out of the White House. But the bums who set the monetary policy remain entrenched at the Fed, safe from the electorate, free from blame, and free from the threat of losing their jobs. There is no accountability for their actions. It is Congress that created the Fed, and it is in Congress where the Fed's biggest critics speak out against it today. Congress, impelled by the will of the people, has the power to kill the Fed. The makers and the owners of the media know this. A strong anti-Congress propaganda effort has been at work to turn the people against any congressional action that would weaken the Fed's power. In a February 3rd, 2015 article in USA Today, business columnist Daryl Delamaid wrote that an audit of the Fed by Congress would result in legislators manipulating policy for politically expedient goals, which he said would be detrimental to the economy. On November 4, 2010, a collection of Federal Reserve officials, bankers, and economists convened at Jekyll Island to commemorate the 100-year anniversary of the secret meeting that resulted in the creation of the Federal Reserve. According to a November 8, 2010 article in Bloomberg News by Scott Landman, attendees checked in at the Jekyll Island Club Hotel's Federal Reserve room. The room was adorned with portraits of 6 men from the elite of the banking and financial world, who 100 years prior had avoided reporters, retreated to the isolated resort, and devised a plan for an American central bank. The commendation which included a 4-day conference of the past, present, and future of monetary policy, was held in an indoor tennis court turned into a banquet hall named after J.P. Morgan. Attendees included Fed Chairman of the day, Ben Bernanke, former Fed Chairman Alan Greenspan, and several governors from the various Federal Reserve banks. Former Fed Chair Paul Volcker did not attend but addressed the assembled luminaries through a videotaped message. Much of the discussion at the 2010 Jekyll Island conferences was about economic crisis, such as the Great Depression, the runaway inflation of the 70s, 1990-91 recession, and the deep recession of 2007, which the Fed was still struggling to cope with when the conference was being held. Just think that over for a moment. The rationale for founding the Federal Reserve was to put a stop to economic crises such as the Panic of 1907. 100 years after the blueprints for the Fed were drawn up at Jekyll Island, Federal Reserve officials were on the island conducting panel discussions about economic crisis since the founding of the Fed that were far worse than the Panic of 1907. These men were commemorating the foundation of the institution that had totally failed to achieve the stated objective of providing us with a safer, more stable monetary and financial system. Depression, recession, boom and bust. This has been the economic history of our nation since the founding of the Fed. We have watched as the rich have gotten far richer than at any point in our history, while the middle class barely treads water, and the ranks of the poor continue to grow. Yep. And in the Holy Quran, Allah condemns the secret councils and secret meetings. Think about that in the Bilderberg Group secret meetings and WF Forum and all these secret meetings. All right. This is a good paragraph. We Americans are still a fortunate people. We still live in a prosperous nation. We still have the ability to speak out and organize. We come from a great nation of people who follow a proud tradition of standing up against tyranny and fighting for justice, freedom, and liberty. The spirit of 1776 still lives inside us. But today our great nation has fallen into a sorry state. We are fighting undeclared foreign wars around the world. Tens of millions of our citizens are unemployed. Our great and modern economy is being deindustrialized and made dependent on the economic production of foreign nations. The prosperity of the American people is in decline. A police and surveillance state is being erected around us. We are being buried under a massive debt as been promised to be paid to bankers and for foreign governments through the confiscation of the wages of working Americans. Our culture is in decline and is growing increasingly more morally bankrupt. Rights to privacy under the Fourth Amendment are now lost as intelligence agencies and corporations have taken a free hand to spy on us and watch our every move. Our borders are wide open and our sovereignty has been eroded with each trade treaty that our government passes. The attacks on our Constitution and our traditions by the corporate media, academia, and our politicians continue relentlessly. In 1834, President Andrew Jackson allegedly stood before a group of Philadelphia bankers and spoke his mind about the Fed of his day, the second bank of the United States. Gentlemen, Jackson said, I too have been a close observer of the doings of the Bank of the United States. I've had men watching you for a long time, and am convinced that you have used the funds of the bank to speculate in the breadstuffs of the country. When you won, you divided the profits amongst you, and when you lost, you charged it to the bank. You tell me that if I take the deposits from the bank and annul its charter, I shall ruin 10,000 families. That may be true, gentlemen, but that is your sin. Should I let you go on, you will ruin 50,000 families. That would be my sin. You are a den of vipers and thieves. I have determined to rout you out, and by the eternal God, I will rout you out. Jackson routed them out, killed the bank, and paid off the national debt. However, he did not go far enough. The fractional reserve banking system had enriched, empowered the bankers was left in place. The bankers were patient. They waited and plotted until the time was right. 77 years later, the new central bank, the Fed, rose from Jekyll Island, stronger, more pervasive, and better disguised from the public. From any objective point of view, the Fed has utterly failed to fulfill the reasons for its founding. It has been a disaster for the American people, but it has been a smashing success for the small clique of people it serves. The big bankers who are its beneficiaries are richer and more powerful than ever. In his monumental historical work, Tragedy and Hope, Georgetown historian Carol Quigley stated that great civilizations pass through a process of evolution that begins with a slow start, followed by an age of expansion, then an age of crisis, followed by an age of universal empire. It is the age of universal empire that civilizations grow corrupt. Racked by internal struggles of a social and constitutional character, weakened by loss of faith in its older ideologies and by the challenge of newer ideas incompatible with its past nature, this civilization grows steadily weaker until it is submerged by outside enemies and eventually disappears. Quigley wrote. However, Quigley also wrote that Western civilization has been able to reform and reorganize itself, allowing for expansion to begin anew. Quigley wrote that Western civilization is in the age of universal empire, with the United States being the seat of power. Quigley saw two possibilities for the future of Western civilization: reorganization or decay, followed by invasion and the end of our civilization. The United States grew into a great power because of our favorable geography, our government that ensured all liberties and unlocked the great potential of the human spirit, and our free enterprise system, which made us prosperous. We were fortunate that such a brilliant collection of people came together and wrote the U.S. Constitution, which organized our government in such an exceptional way, under a combination of pragmatism, realism, and principle, which allowed our nation to grow freer and wealthier with each new generation. The republic system of government and our free enterprise system made us into a great nation, a good nation that promised its citizens freedom and the opportunity to pursue their dreams however they saw fit. But unfortunately, our founders were not as successful in organizing our monetary system, which had fallen into the hands of private bankers. These bankers have shaped our monetary system to favor usurers and speculators over people who perform the productive work of providing goods and services for the American people. The monetary system we have today is designed to enrich usurers and speculators at the expense of working Americans. The system was specifically designed to place the American people and the nation at large in debt to private bankers who have grown rich off the collection of interest that compounds and grows year after year, decade after decade. This monetary system has corrupted our government and free enterprise system, where today, more than 2 centuries after the Declaration of Independence, we are facing economic decay, invasion, and possibly the end of our American civilization for all time. Our nation was born in rebellion when Americans decided enough was enough and declared their independence from a tyrannical king. 1776, Tom Paine captured the spirit of the day when he released an incendiary pamphlet entitled Common Sense, which pointed out the ridiculousness of being ruled by a hereditary monarchy. Men who look upon themselves born to reign and others to obey soon grow insolent. Selected from the rest of mankind, their minds are early poisoned by importance, and the world they act in differs so materially from the world at large. They have but little opportunity of knowing its true interest, and when they succeed to the government are frequently the most ignorant and unfit of any throughout the dominions, Paine wrote. If Paine were alive today, he would undoubtedly turn his pen against our current rulers, who have grown every bit as corrupt and are every bit as unfit to rule as any monarch of the 18th century. Today we are ruled by Wall Street bankers, usurers, and speculators who have empowered themselves and enriched themselves through control of our monetary system. This system has enabled them to create money from nothing and charge interest for it. They've grown insolent, and their minds are poisoned by importance, as they siphon off the prosperity of the American people and lead us down a road to ruin. Not only the prosperity of the American people, but our people abroad. America power in the United States today is concentrated in the Federal Reserve Bank. Today is the time for action to be taken against the bank, to fully audit it, arrest anyone involved in malfeasance, shut it down, and put in place a new monetary system that is not controlled by a small clique of international financiers and shareholders of multinational corporations. But before any action is taken, an understanding of our current predicament is necessary. To understand our misfortunes, first we must let the scales fall from our eyes and look back and understand how we got here. All right, continuing on, I highlighted this passage. I made left to the states, the subjects of foreign powers might suffer from the same cause, and hence the Union be discredited and bored by the indiscretion of a single member. No one of these mischiefs is less incident to power in the states to emit paper money, to make anything but gold and silver, tender and payment of debts is withdrawn from the states on the same principles that was of issuing paper money. With the ratification of the Constitution, the states surrendered their power to coin money and to print paper money. A new single currency was created and a national currency union was formed. This increased and facilitated commerce between the states and unified the states economically into a single country. That was in the development of the United States. There's lots of independent states issuing money, and there wasn't any central common currency. So the whole world states equaling nations as nation states. The move we are seeing in these times, July 2023, told much of the world's nation states to create their own central bank digital currencies. Which, in my opinion, if money credit creation is rampant enough, will no doubt sow hyperinflation and chaos in terms of the world globalized market. What is the value of money? If everyone is just printing and making up their own money, what is its worth then? What gives value to money? What makes the world go round? Of course, it's the everyday workers actually producing real stuff. You can't eat nor drink money. You can't build a house out of paper. CBDC's Atlantic Counselor, just a snapshot. Central Bank Digital Currency Tracker. Snapshot. Brazil. After conducting a closed pilot program with financial institutions in 2023, the Central Bank of Brazil president says he aims to launch a CBDC in 2024. Canada, 2023, Bank of Canada released an analytical note highlighting the importance of from IMF.org, the future of money, gearing up for central bank digital currency, and the Atlantic Council. The Atlantic Council is it's like a think tank which produces a newsletter and whatnot for NATO. NATO think tank, U.S. led, of course. NATO is U.S. led. So here's states, 190 countries, or 130 countries actually, representing 98% of global GDP, are exploring a central bank digital currency. In May 2020, only 35 countries were considering a CBDC. New high of 64 countries are in an advanced phase of exploration. 11 countries have fully launched a digital currency. The European Central Bank is on track to begin its pilot for the digital euro. Over 20 other countries will take steps towards piloting for CBDCs in 2023. Australia, Thailand, and Russia intend to continue pilot testing. India and Brazil plan to launch in 2024. So, why would the government might need cheaper, better access to money, increasing efficiency in payments, and lowering transaction costs, creating programmable money, and improving transparency in money flows? Central banks will be able to obviously track in every financial transaction, be able to control money, take money, Orwellian type 1984 Brave New World levels of granular control over people. Continuing on. Page 45. Fed stands like a colossus over us, controlling our currency and our economy. Since 1913, the debt that it feeds on has grown to immense proportions. Its debt siphons the wealth of the nation, from the people and concentrates it into the hands of a small number of wealthy bankers. The tyranny of debt. We have a debt-based monetary system. Most Americans today don't understand this concept, but the people who run the Federal Reserve Bank do. No debt equals no money. Every dollar in existence is a debt that you ultimately must be repaid to a bank at interest. Our money is debt. Dollar bills in your wallet and the digits in your bank account actually represents debts that must be repaid with interest, which are profits collected by banks. Each dollar in your wallet and every digit in your savings account represents a debt that is gathering interest and must be repaid to banks. Those banks, in turn, must pay their debts to the Federal Reserve minus the profits they earn through usury. The prophet Alaihi Wasallam said this about the end times, that no one would be able to escape even the pennies and crumbs of interest. Just holding money means that you collect interest on it. A savings account, for example, collects interest, maybe a few cents a month on $1,000 or $2,000. You get paid every month a few more cents. You just earn some interest. Most of us think of money as a measure of value and a medium of exchange. That is how most of us use money. Our employers may pay us money for the work we do pay us money for the work we do for them, and we in turn exchange that money for the goods and services that we need to live our lives. But for the banks, money is created as an instrument of debt that is used to collect interest for profit. Money is created by banks when they issue loans, either to people or to institutions. Money enters the economy when a bank issues a loan. Once the loan is issued, the money is spent into the economy, where for most of it then serves as a measure of value and a medium of exchange. However, all the money that was issued as a loan must be paid back to the bank, and it must be paid at interest. This means that more money must be paid back to the banks than what was entered into the economy when the loan was issued and used to make a purchase. The volume of money in the economy is determined by the willingness of the banks to issue loans. If the banks are confident, they issue many loans, and the money supply expands. If they are wary, they issue fewer loans, and the money supply contracts. Prior to the creation of the Federal Reserve, banks around the country competed with each other. Banks raised or lowered interest rates based on the demand for money in the economy. They competed with each other by attempting to offer higher rates for savings accounts, etc., and lower rates on loans. With the creation of the Federal Reserve, the process of setting interest rates was centralized. Every 5 to 8 weeks, the Federal Reserve's Federal Open Market Committee meets to determine interest rates and the level of reserves of the nation's banks. The Federal Open Market Committee is made up of the 7 members of the Fed's Bank of Governors, plus the 12 presidents of the regional Federal Reserve banks. The Board of Governors and 5 of the presidents of the regional banks have voting rights on the committee. The regional presidents rotate their voting rights, except for the president of the New York Federal Reserve Bank, who has permanent voting rights. This committee determines the discount rate and the Fed funds rate. A discount rate is the interest rate the Fed charges its member in its institutions. The Fed funds rate is the rate member banks charge each other, mainly for overnight deposits by the Fed. By setting these rates, the Fed affects how much interest governments, banks, businesses, and the public must pay to borrow money. Remember, interest is a charge for the use of money. Since money enters the economy through loans issued through banks, money has interest attached. Interest collected by banks is profit for the banks. Furthermore, interest compounds and grows each time it is collected and lent back into the economy as new loans. If Fed also sets the reserve requirements, which is the ratio of money a bank must keep in reserves versus how much it can issue in loans. Fractional reserve banking. Currently, most banks hold a 10% ratio of reserves versus loans. So when you deposit money into the bank can lend out 90% of it and hold 10% on hand at any given time. By changing the reserve requirement, the Fed can expand or contract the money supply. If the reserve requirement goes down, the banks can lend more money. If the requirement goes up, the banks lend less and the money supply contracts. The Fed also buys and sells U.S. Treasury securities. When it buys securities, it expands the money supply by trading cash for those securities. When it sells securities, it collects cash for the securities, which contracts the money supply. So the money supply is essentially determined by the amount of debt in the nation as a whole. The Fed controls the amount of debt that is issued by determining the amount of interest that banks charge and the level of reserve that banks must keep at the regional Federal Reserve banks and by buying and selling government securities. The fact that our monetary system is based on debt is the most important issue of our time, yet most Americans have never given it much thought or are completely oblivious to this fact. When the Federal Reserve Act was passed by Congress in 1913, privately issued debt-based currency was legally backstopped by the wealth, earnings, and taxes of the American people. That was the way our current monetary system was intentionally designed by the men at Jekyll Island to put you and the country at large into perpetual debt to interest-collecting bankers. Right? Money rules our lives. We spend our days trying to accumulate enough of it to provide ourselves with food and shelter. We spend our lives striving to earn enough of it to pay our obligations. When we have enough money, we live well. When we have too little, we struggle. Those who have none lead lives of want and desperation, while others have accumulated vast surpluses of it and live like modern-day pharaohs. All the world is their playground. People will toil under the hot sun for it. They will risk life and limb for it. They will sell their bodies for it. They will debase themselves. They will kill for it, die for it, offer scraps of colored paper made on a printing press or digits on a computer screen that are effortlessly created by people who work in secret behind closed doors and who are accountable to no one. Under our current monetary system, all the money that exists in the economy, either in the pockets of the poor or in the bank accounts of the rich, is debt that is owed to banks. This fact might seem counterintuitive, but it is an important concept to keep in mind because of the incredibly negative ramifications for the vast majority of us, while making a few insiders fantastically wealthy and powerful and able to affect our lives to an incredible degree. Our debt-based monetary system is the source of many of the profound problems our nation faces today, from economic upheavals that have thrown millions of Americans out of jobs and out of their homes, to the decline of our middle class, to the concentration of wealth into fewer and fewer hands, to the wars we seem to continually be drawn into, to the massive debt burden our government is placing on our shoulders and on the shoulders of our children and grandchildren, and their children and grandchildren. This debt burden is making us and our descendants poorer and less free than the generations of Americans that came before us. Our debt-based monetary system is undermining the independence of the American revolutionaries fought for when our nation was founded more than 2 centuries ago. Our prosperity, our liberties, and our future are being stripped from us and crushed beneath a growing mountain of debt that is compounding, expanding day after day, year after year, decade after decade. It's a racket. Imagine you're allowed to borrow money in vast amounts from the Fed, say $1 billion, at an interest rate of 0.25%, and then allowed to turn around and buy government securities at 3%. 1 year later, you have earned a profit of $2.5 million from interest payments on those securities. Essentially, you have done nothing of value to anyone, but you have still earned $2.5 million in profit. That profit was paid to you from the income taxes of the people. This is exactly what we have been allowing the big banks to do for the past several years. New debt is created, so there will never be enough money in the economy to pay back old debt. The new debt, like the old debt, has interest attached, but the money to pay the interest is never created. Under this system, debt must continue to grow so that the old debt can be repaid in an ever-growing pyramid of debt built upon debt. In our debt-based monetary system, the amount of debt in the economy must always exceed the money supply. It is a perpetually growing debt bubble that must continue to expand until the loans stop and the bubble pops. When this happens, as it inevitably must, the money supply quickly contracts and the economy slows, and we fall into a recession or a depression. It goes into the debt cycle. Three stages of the debt cycle are inflation, deflation, and confiscation. Repeat the cycle of debt decade after decade, century after century, and over time the bakers will own the earth. An important distinction must be made between lending money at interest and investing money. Right. In our debt-based monetary system, the bankers have loaned out vast sums to the people, private enterprises, and governments, and they have accumulated enormous power and control. Through this power to create credit and the resulting cycle of inflation, deflation, and confiscation, bankers have taken control of our media, our corporations, our land, our government, and our national resources. The American public rides the debt roller coaster seemingly oblivious to the fact that the ups and downs are designed into the system. Economists and the media call it the business cycle. They talk about it as if some natural and inevitable thing, like the tides, the seasons, or winter storms. Modern economists tell us that the business cycle hits a peak when we reach a period of full employment and our output capacity has maxed out. Wage inflation occurs because businesses must compete for scarce labor. Meanwhile, rising wages mean more money is chasing the same amount of goods, causing inflation. Then we see a period of contraction in output, employment levels, and income begin to fall. Output, employment, and trade bottom out. Businesses then pull themselves out of the trough and the economy grows again. Under the traditional economic view of the business cycle, the problem is not rising levels of debt, but instead rising wages. This traditional view of the business cycle completely ignores the role lending from banks has in driving expansionary periods, which lead to booms, and the role of banks in tightening lending, which leads to contractionary periods. It's all the fault of rising wages, you see. The cycle of debt caused by a debt-based monetary system is what causes the pain. The booms and busts are caused when money is created as loans owed to bankers and the moneyed financiers. Most people in this world must work for money to earn our daily bread. The banks create this money out of thin air using our own savings as collateral. The banks use the people's money to feed off the productivity of the people. John Adams wrote, "All the perplexities, confusion, and distress in America arise not from defects in their constitution or confederation, but not from want of honor or virtue, so much as from the downright ignorance of the nature of coin, credit, and circulation." Henry Ford is alleged to have said, "It is well enough that people of the nation do not understand our banking and monetary system, for if they did, I believe there would be a revolution before tomorrow morning." Our monetary system is not difficult to understand. It is a system based on debt that has been designed to benefit the few at the expense of the many. It is high time Americans make the effort to understand our monetary system. The current system needs to be reformed and reorganized. A new system can be designed in which money is not an instrument of debt, but instead is merely a measure of value and a medium of exchange. It is entirely possible to create a new monetary system that is not designed to serve passive income seekers, but instead rewards those who perform productive work that enriches society as a whole. It is possible to design a new system that does not serve the interests of plutocratic financiers, but instead uses interest in inflation-free money to serve the interests of the American people. We could design a new system that favors the interests of small business owners and workers over the interests of big banks, multinational corporations, usurers, speculators, and rent seekers. We could design a system that serves the interests of free enterprise, commerce, and work, a system that creates an economy of high production, full employment, and high wages, rather than our current economy of stagnant wages, high unemployment, and corporate cartels. We could design a new system that is based on American principles of separation of powers, checks and balances, and accountability to the people. The purpose of our economy should be to serve the needs and wants of the American people. Unfortunately, the current purpose of our economy is to serve shareholders, passive income seekers. These passive income seekers are mostly made up of the richest segment of society, the 1%, and they are as likely to be foreigners as American citizens, without loyalty to our nation and our people. It doesn't have to be this way. Our nation has produced some of the world's greatest scientists, inventors, and thinkers in every field of endeavor. Monetary systems are not that complicated. Well, we as a people are perfectly capable of designing a better system, indeed, that can increase the prosperity and liberty of the American people and end the tyranny of the usurers who are now in control. The tyranny of usury is section. Aristotle called usury an unnatural mode of making money. He wrote in the 4th century BC in his book Politics, the most hated soul, and with the greatest reason, is usury, which makes a gain out of money itself, not from the natural object of it, for money was intended to be used in exchange, but not to increase that interest. Usury was recognized as disrupted by the ancient Greeks. It was eventually condemned by Roman law as well as in many other countries and civilizations. Judaism, Christianity, and Islam all warned of the inequities that result from lending money at interest. Shakespeare wrote, "Neither a borrower nor a lender be." Benjamin Franklin wrote, "But think what you do when you run in debt. You give to another power over your liberty." The problem that arises with lending money at interest and then lending out your returns so they compound is a matter of simple mathematics. An old legend about the origin of chess secondly illustrates the power of compounding. The story goes that the inventor of chess showed his new game to a rich Indian king. I read about this. I believe it was a Muslim man. The king was so impressed, a Muslim man, mathematician, with the game that he granted the inventor a wish. The inventor asked for 1 grain of rice for the first square of his chessboard, 2 grains for the next furrow for the next, and so on, each of the 64 squares, with each square having twice as many grains of rice as the square before. This is a problem within capitalism when you have just a system that tries to keep growing, and at a percentage rate. The circulation of capital doesn't even matter what it actually, actually things on the ground. But the GDP, this is also in the book, Less is More, How Degrowth is the Way Forward, or whatever it's called. That sorry. Degrowth as a way forward. That the economy can't keep growing, and especially GDP as the lead indicator of economic growth or progress is a false pretense or a false assumption that, just because you have money turning over and circulating within an economy doesn't actually mean that you're producing goods and services that are, doing anything or having any effect on the actual real economy, basically. The king was amazed that the man had asked for such a small reward, and ordered that a sack of rice be brought so that the rice could be portioned for every square. 1 grain of rice was placed on the first square of the board, 2 on the second, 4, 8, 16, 32, 64, 128, 256 on the ninth, 512 on the 10th, 1024 on the 11th. On the 21st square, the amount was 1 million grains of rice. 2 million on the 22nd, 4 million on the 23rd, 8 million on the 24th, with less than half of the squares apportioned. As a pile of rice began to overflow from the palace windows, the king realized that the reward added up to an astronomical sum, far greater than all the rice that could be harvested in 1,000 years. The king had been duped because of his ignorance of the implications of exponential growth. He then executed the inventor of chess. Mathematically, compound interest grows on a curve that rises modestly at first and then becomes ever steeper, before going vertical and shooting to infinity. When you lend money at interest, you're attempting to climb this curve. The bigger the fortune you have to begin with, the faster your compound interest curve will rise. However, the growth curve of actual economic production follows a different curve. Someone who farms for a living, owns a business, or manufactures goods that are in demand will also see modest growth in the beginning, then often a strong rise in the curve of profits that he is making. But unlike with compound interest, once market saturation of capital is reached, the curve will flatten and even perhaps decline as new competitors enter the field and existing machinery depreciates and needs to be replaced. The lender of money has few capital costs to worry about. He does not produce goods that require factories and workers. He does not perform actual labor. All he does is lend out money to one person, charge interest for it, and then lend out his earnings to the next person. If he is conservative and only lends to people he is sure can pay him back, his money will grow, and then outpace the profits of those who are producing goods and services in an economy. People who actually do work that allows society to function. The money lender will see his fortune grow without the need to actually perform labor or spend his money on machinery, factories, warehouses, trucks, and salaries for large numbers of laborers. The money lender feeds off the productive sector of the economy he takes from it without contributing. Like the Indian king in the legend of the chessboard, the American public has been duped into permitting our government to borrow at interest, which compounds, and is then paid back to bankers for taxes on our incomes. We taxpayers have been made responsible to pay for the rice that keeps piling up on the chessboard in greater and greater amounts due to the nature of exponential growth. What the ancients recognized was that the rich have an advantage when it comes to money lending. Since the rich have more money to lend, they can charge lower interest rates than the small lender and still make money faster. They can also weather defaults better than the small lender who has less money to fall back on. The large lender can quickly crowd out the small lender. The rich, by definition, have a surplus of money, so they often lend out their extra money to others to gain a return. Since the poor have the greatest demand for money, they will by necessity borrow it from the rich. When the poor borrow money, they must pay back the principal plus interest, which means they have to pay back a larger sum than they borrowed. The longer they take to pay back the loan, the more money they are shuffling from the earnings of their labor into the pockets of the rich. Charging interest on money is merely the shuffling of money from their pockets of the poor into the pockets of the rich. The higher the interest rate, the faster the rich are filling their pockets with the earnings of the poor. In a society where usury has become commonplace, money will concentrate in the pockets of the rich and become ever scarcer in the pockets of the poor. People will become increasingly indebted to a plutocracy that will end up owning everything. The people will become bond slaves to the rich. What the ancients realized from the bitter pill of experience was that a society in which usury is practiced will become unstable and injustices will become intolerable. The majority of the people will end up laboring under the heavy burden of debt in order to feed the greed of a small number of idle rich. The plight of the poor will eventually seek expression through violence and revolution. And Allah, God knows best. Law knows best. Law knows best. For all the command of law. Money lending was banned in Europe until the late Middle Ages, when the restrictions on usury were lifted. Borrowers signed legal contracts with money lenders, which were enforced by the state. Borrowers who defaulted by law could have their property seized or could be thrown into debtor's prison. Those restrictions on usury were lifted so that kings could borrow gold from rich usurers to build up their militaries. The kings of Europe paid back the money lenders through taxes on their subjects. Money lenders are great students of human nature. Lending money to human beings quickly teaches the money lender how to size up the character of a man. The money lender has learned that a rich man can be a deadbeat and a poor man can never miss a payment. A man of sterling character can fall into bad luck and default after a lifetime of reliability. A borrower in need will swear on his mother's grave that he will make good on his loan. But after a year or two of living under the burden of loan payments, he will find it to his advantage to shirk the money lender. The money lender knows that words and promises are ephemeral, and without the threat of force, even the most sincere borrower can become delinquent. Without the credible threat of force, the usurer soon loses his shirt. The money lender knows he must be willing to turn the screws on his borrower if need be. Over the millennia, moneylenders grew wealthy by taking advantage of a defect in human character. People have needs and desires that they want fulfilled sooner rather than later. People have a tendency not to want to delay the gratification of their needs. A king prefers to borrow from a money lender because it is easier than facing the wrath of his subjects today if he raises their taxes. Even knowing that to pay back the money lender, he would have to raise their taxes anyway, not only for the original amount he needed, but also for the interest that is compounding. Instead of saving for months or years, people will borrow money to have what they want right now, even if it means paying usurious interest rates and paying much more money over time than the original amount needed. Most banks in the world today engage in fractional reserve banking. This practice has had profound effects on the world. It is a powerful aggregator of wealth. Its practice creates a monetary vortex that sucks in money in ever-growing quantities. The modern fractional reserve system is a money machine that enriches and powers bankers while periodically throwing thousands, even millions of people out of work. It is a debt-based system that is inherently unstable and which regularly, like clockwork, causes extreme economic upheavals. This is the section, Don't Tread on Me. In 1838, young Abraham Lincoln gave a speech. We find ourselves in the peaceful possession of the fairest portion of the earth as regards extent of territory, fertility of soil, and salubrity of climate. We find ourselves under the government of a system of political institutions conducing more essentially to the ends of civil and religious liberty than any of which the history of former times tells us. We, when mounting the stage of existence, found ourselves the legal inheritors of these fundamental blessings. Lincoln recognized in his day, when America was still a small country compared to the great powers of Europe, that no overseas power could threaten us. He recognized that the danger to America and to our liberty was not from foreign armies. He warned that if we were to be defeated as a nation, our defeat would come from within. Are not our current policies of free trade, mass immigration, and endless wars abroad the policies of national suicide? Since the foundation of the Federal Reserve, these policies have been pushed on us relentlessly. In his autobiography, General Ulysses S. Grant wrote of the prowess of the American fighting man during the Civil War, the enduring resoluteness of the Northerner, and the dash and daring of the Southern soldier. The troops on both sides were American, Grant wrote, and united they need not fear any foreign foe. When we are united, no nation abroad is a threat to us, not China, not Russia, not the nations of Europe, or any combination of them. Well, times do change. But, anyway, Allah knows best about past civilizations and nation states, empires. The true threat to our nation is not for nations or some terrorist organization overseas. The true threat is within. The true threat to the American people is from the globalist politicians and bureaucrats who have infested our government and have entangled us in conflicts around the world. In our name, they bomb wedding parties and kill children. They arm revolutionaries who destabilize societies. They meddle in the politics of other countries. They promise American lives to defend countries that we have no common interest with. These politicians and bureaucrats are funded by multinational corporations, international banks, and foreign lobbyists. They are putting us all in danger. These people are not loyal to the American people, but instead to their benefactors and to the goals of globalist organizations such as the Council on Foreign Relations, the Trilateral Commission, and the Bilderbergers. Their corporate media whips up hatred toward certain nations, while the globalists want us to destroy, while presenting favored nations and groups with sympathy. They attach us to foreign nations and obligate us to defend them through treaties that entangle us in alliances that put our own people under threat in conflicts that are none of our business. The globalists are supported in their goals and in their actions by bought and paid for propagandists in the media, while true patriots are shunned or smeared. As avenues to foreign influence in innumerable ways, such attachments are particularly alarming to the truly enlightened and independent patriot. George Washington told us. How many opportunities do they afford to tamper with domestic factions, to practice the arts of seduction, to mislead public opinion, to influence all the public councils? Let's protect America again. Let's be a republic again and defend our Constitution, our liberties, and our prosperity here at home. Let's defend our own borders for a change. We've sent our young people around the world for more than a century now, participating in foreign wars that have plowed under hundreds of thousands of our own and millions of others. Are we loved around the world for all this slaughter? Have we brought the world peace? No. Let's pursue a different course. Our country is exhausted. Let's stay home and take care of our own and not be part of other people's conflicts. Whether we do this or not, there will be more wars in the future. Countries will go to war and people will die like they always have. If we stay out of it, the world will still turn. Observe good faith and justice towards all nations. Cultivate peace and harmony with all. The great rule of conduct for us in regard to foreign nations is in extending our commercial relations to have with them as little political connection as possible. So far as we have already formed engagements, let them be fulfilled with perfect good faith. Here, let us stop. Let's heed Washington's words. It is time to return to a policy of avoiding foreign entanglements. We are strong and can defend our own country without being pulled into conflicts abroad. Armed neutrality should be our foreign policy. We should cultivate peace and harmony with all, but stay out of their stupid rules. The author writes. Indeed. The obstacle to this policy is our own world-mongering press and politicians who are paid off by globalists and foreign influence. They are the enemies of the American patriot. When our service members join the military, they hold up their right hands and solemnly swear an oath of enlistment. Our officers take a similar oath. They raise their right hands and state their names and say, I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, that I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same, that I take this obligation freely without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion, and that I will well and faithfully discharge the duties of the office on which I am about to enter. So help me God. They swear to protect the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. Those enemies are not in Asia, Europe, or Africa. They are here at home, walking the halls of the capital. They are in the boardrooms of international banks and multinational corporations, in think tank conference rooms, in newsrooms, pushing their agenda, planning new trade treaties, planning to submerge us under a deluge of new immigrants, planning new rules. It is time to turn our attention to the home front where our Constitution is being destroyed by the enemies of our Republic, both foreign and domestic. No more wars abroad. Let's defend our freedom here at home. Let's defend the legacy handed down to us through the sacrifices of the patriots of 1776. This is about the tyranny of the media. That's a pretty good piece as well. To understand how the bankers take control of the newspaper industry provides a good illustration of her methods. At one time in this country, newspapers were mainly family-owned enterprises that gave a wide variety of opinions from community to community. In the late 1800s, banking interests began to gobble up paper after paper. But even after World War II, many newspapers were still privately owned, and the editorial pages reflected the opinions of their owners. Cities around the country often had more than one newspaper, often with morning and evening editions. But toward the end of the 20th century, the newspaper business was becoming more and more consolidated by a smaller and smaller group of men. In the 1980s, a copy editor named Dean Singleton began buying up newspapers and building a media empire. Singleton was a college dropout from a poor family from the small Texas town of Graham. He tried his hand at being a reporter, which hadn't worked out for him. At age 21, while working as a copy editor of the Dallas Morning News, some entrepreneurs offered him the chance to run a small-town weekly newspaper, which he accepted. At age 34, Simpleton began acquiring newspapers and building one of America's biggest newspaper empires, purchasing one newspaper after another around the nation. When he was 36, he spent $150 million to buy the Houston Post and another $95 million to buy the Denver Post. Singleton's game was to use debt to buy struggling newspapers, often from heirs who had inherited the papers from their fathers and did not wish to run them. Singleton would buy these papers and then ruthlessly cut costs by firing reporters, photographers, copy editors, and any personnel that he could. He bought up all the papers he could and consolidated staff on a regional basis. Editorial and copy desk was centralized by region to cut expenses. Opinion pages and editorial content were made the same across regions, meaning that where once you could find a variety of opinions from various papers regarding different topics, the same opinions would run across Singleton's media news group empire. Same politicians would be supported or attacked or ignored, and the same issues and topics were covered in the same way. The front pages in Denver, Oakland, or Detroit were often exactly the same. By age 40, Singleton was a wealthy media mogul with a great deal of influence. By 2005, he controlled 56 daily newspapers and over 100 non-dailies in 12 states with a circulation of about 2.5 million. From 2007 to 2012, he served as the chairman of the Associated Press, the world's largest wire service that provides news content to media outlets around the world. Many articles on the internet about Singleton never is it explained how a small-town Texan who was never much of a reporter and not a businessman suddenly rose up meteorically from the copy desk to build and own one of the nation's largest newspaper companies. Singleton has been described as having a strong work ethic, but his business experience limited to running a small-town weekly paper purchased with other people's money. Yet by age 36, he had spent $150 million to purchase a metropolitan newspaper in one of the nation's largest cities. How does one do that? The answer lies in Singleton's business partner, a man named Richard Scudder. What is intriguing about Scudder is that he was a U.S. Army military intelligence officer during World War II. According to the New York Times, Scudder was assigned to Operation Annie being short for Anonymous. The operation was an underground German language radio station that broadcasted misinformation to the German people. Scudder worked in psychological operations warfare, or PSYOPs for short, which is a military field that specializes in producing and disseminating misinformation and disinformation to persuade, change, and influence populations in order to achieve strategic goals. After the war, Scudder returned to the United States to work in journalism. His connections in the financial industry enabled him to provide Singleton with the money to buy up newspapers around the country, consolidate them, and centralize the themes and messages that his papers were using to influence the American population. And the offer goes on. I'd like to point this out. Second, the papers are always supportive of free trade. Free trade is mentioned as a net benefit to the nation, while the negative effects such as job loss, wage stagnation, and community disruption and so on are downplayed or blamed on other causes. Every now and then, the paper's editorial pages will issue warnings about the dangers of protectionism. The ghost of Reed Smoot and Willis C. Hawley often haunt the editorial pages whenever a whiff of protectionist sentiment is detected in the public. Right. This was back in 2015. It's largely the case. Now, as America turns more towards economic nationalism in its foreign policy, and economic objectives, it is different. Obviously, we're seeing sanctions, etc., increasing tariffs, etc., since Trump in 2016. Third, the papers are supportive of America's interventionist foreign policy, establishment politicians who advocate for American action against Iran or Russia or anywhere else around the world are portrayed as being mainstream, while politicians who do not support America's world police war are portrayed as fringe characters and isolationists. Media news group papers support interventionism abroad but will harshly criticize actions of our troops overseas or specific decisions made by interventionist politicians. But the theme that America must take a leadership role in the world using our military remains. Fourth, the primacy of the Federal Reserve has faithfully supported specific actions and actors can be criticized when it comes to monetary policy, but the monetary system itself is never questioned. Media news group newspapers always support this system and defend it. For example, on July 27, 2009, during the depths of the housing bust, media news group newspapers in Northern California ran an opinion piece that was a spirited defense of the Fed. Op-ed stated that Fed Chairman Ben Bernanke was taking criticism from both sides of the aisle in Congress due to the Fed's failure to uncover unsound lending practices by financial firms. The Obama administration wants to give the Fed greater authority to oversee financial institutions, something it should have done in the past, the editorial stated. A particularly troublesome idea that Bernanke is wisely rejecting is a congressional proposal to let the Government Accountability Office audit the Fed, as it is essential that the central bank remain independent of congressional influence, which could result in financial decisions by the Fed being based more on partisan politics than sound economics. The Fed should be given a chance to show that with some additional new authority it can keep a check on the lending practices of financial institutions without the aid of a new consumer protection bureaucracy and the meddling of Congress. There you have it in a nutshell. The purpose of buying up all these newspapers in communities from coast to coast was to persuade change and influence the American people to accept the strategic goals of mass immigration policy, free trade policy, American interventionism abroad, and to protect the independence of the Federal Reserve from democratic reforms. The Fed must remain independent and free to control the monetary system without the interference of our elected representatives in the democratic process. Right. Some people might think that this is just how capitalism works, but in 2010 you can see Media News Group filed for bankruptcy. It borrowed nearly $1 billion and had squandered almost all of it. Under a reorganization plan, Media News Group was allowed to reduce its debt from $930 million to $165 million. The creditors agreed to reduce the debt in exchange for equity in the company. The two biggest creditors were Wells Fargo and Bank of America, which received the lion's share of the equity. Then the plan specified Singleton would receive a base salary of $994,000 plus 6% of the restructured company stock and annual bonuses up to $500,000 if the company hit earnings targets. The plan specified that the president of the company, Joseph Lodovich, would earn a salary of $1 million and annual bonuses as much as $500,000 and receive 3% of the restructured company's stock. Lodovich had received a $500,000 bonus for his work on the restructuring and for initiating the bankruptcy proceedings, and received another $250,000 more when the bankruptcy plan was approved. So essentially, Singleton racked up nearly $1 billion in debt from big banks to buy up newspapers around the country. They couldn't pay back the debt, so the banks basically cut their losses of $765 million while continuing to pay Singleton around $1 million a year for his work for them. Is this the free enterprise system? Apparently. Money wasn't the object here, at least not for the banks, when it came to financing Singleton and Scudder. The banks were willing to hand over hundreds of millions of dollars to them, and they lost most of it, but the banks were still happy enough with the outcome to continue paying Singleton nearly $1 million a year despite the massive monetary losses. You think an aspiring owner of a small newspaper can compete in the marketplace with the likes of Singleton, is backed by nearly $1 billion and does not have to make a dime of profit. In 2013, Singleton retired a very wealthy man at age 62. He is physically weak and his hands shake from multiple sclerosis, which he had been battling for 26 years while building his empire, but his work for the banks is done and he now lives on a large ranch in Colorado. There's no God but Allah. Singleton's story is not unique to the United States. The international bankers spend millions and are willing to lose it all to put for people in control of the media. After all, it's just money they are spending, and money is just numbers on a screen or pieces of paper printed off a printing press. When you control the system that creates money, then you can always make more of it. And the media is a crucial resource that must be controlled if you're going to maintain control of that system and push an agenda that will destroy the sovereignty of nations and impoverish the middle and working classes. Two of the most widely read newspapers in America are the New York Times and Wall Street Journal. The Times is said to lean left, while the Journal is said to lean right. One is said to be liberal and the other conservative. Two papers are often thought of as being opposed to each other, while the Times appealing to Democrats and liberals and the Journal to Republicans and conservatives. But when it comes to the issues that matter to bankers, the two papers line up and promote the interests of the banks, although they take different angles and approaches. When it comes to immigration, Time takes the humanitarian view. For the Journal, immigration is more an economic than humanitarian matter. Immigration starts new businesses, fills labor shortages, and brings economic growth, if you believe the line the Journal is pushing. Both push for more immigration, both push for free trade, and both push for interventionism abroad. The papers also line up on other issues that the banking elite are pushing, such as gay marriage, global warming, and gun control. As an aside, Carol Quigley had an interesting theory about guns and weapons. In Tragedy and Hope, Quigley stated that authoritarian eras arise when weapons are expensive to use and take specialized skills and training, such as the feudal era of knights in armor on horseback, or our present era of tanks, aircraft carriers, and jet fighters. Eras of democracy and freedom arise when weapons are easy to use and cheap to obtain by the average person, such as the era of the Springfield musket and the Colt 45. Thus, mass armies of citizens equipped with these cheap and easily used weapons begin to replace armies of professional soldiers, beginning about 1800 in Europe and even earlier in America, Quigley wrote. Quigley wrote. At the same time, democratic government began to replace authoritarian governments, but chiefly in those areas where the cheap new weapons were available and local standards of living were high enough to allow people to obtain them. Quigley stated, in 1830, democracy was growing rapidly in Europe and in America. At that time, the development of weapons had reached the point where governments could not get weapons which were much more effective than those which private individuals could get. As a result, governments in Europe in 1830 hardly dared to oppress the people, and democracy was growing. But in the non-European world by 1930, and even more by 1950, governments did dare to and could oppress their peoples, who could do little to prevent it. In our media today, gun control is being presented as being necessary for public safety, especially the safety of our children. Yet, gun control places restrictions on law-abiding gun owners for doing little to stop illegal gun ownership. It is the illegal gun owners who commit the vast majority of gun violence in the United States, while the AR-15 is so rarely used in crime as to be statistically negligible. Obviously, this is a constitutionalist, pro-constitutionalist perspective and person. Has a decent, gun ownership. Whatever. You think them plantation owners allowed their slaves to own guns? Returning to the New York Times, it led the way when it came to war propaganda. In the lead up to the Iraq War, its front page blared headlines about Iraqi weapons of mass destruction that could kill thousands or even millions of us. The Times ran these stories based on information provided from anonymous government officials who were either entirely incompetent or else criminally lying to start a war in which thousands of Americans and tens of thousands, if not more, Iraqis were killed. These anonymous sources peddled their fear-mongering in the pages of the Times. Indeed. As soon as the war was underway, the New York Times became one of the biggest critics of the way it was fought. So the paper helped propagandize us into war and then criticized the actions of the men and women who were fighting and dying in it. The New York Times happens to be one of the world's leading proponents for globalization, free trade, immigration, and interventionism abroad. Right. In 2009, the Mexican multi-billionaire Carlos Slim, who was the second richest man in the world in 2015, lent the Times $250 million. As of 2011, he controlled 8.1% of Class A shares in the New York Times company. So you have a Mexican plutocrat financing one of America's most influential newspapers. And the Times is a major proponent for Mexican immigration and amnesty for illegal immigrants. Any guess as to why? Why? Purely for humanitarian reasons, of course. You should ask yourself why, day in and day out, both the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal, and many other media, spend so much time, money, and effort producing stories about the Middle East and why they are always telling us about how important this region is to us and how we must do this and that over there and spend so much American money and so many lives in a region on the other side of the planet. The interest of the American people is not to go bankrupt and lose our young people fighting in wars in the Middle East. Our true interest is to keep out of quarrels that have been going on for millennia. We're not ever going to solve. But the bankers have interest over there, so they are going to keep telling us not to be isolationist and that we must send our children to fight and die over there. We must pay our taxes to send them there. Well, it becomes obvious to me now, especially during this Ukraine war, that it's the Pentagon, in step, it's the corporations in step with the Pentagon who our media, all of the Western media is in step seemingly with the NATO, U.S.-led NATO and Pentagon and military-industrial complex. All these corporations are basically in the elites. It's like they are in cahoots with one another. Right? People say, they refer to the cabal. And you have the World Economic Forum and the secret Bilderberg meetings, etc. Davos, man. Anyway, can get into that in a bit. Here's some more stuff. The Times told us through anonymous sources from various intelligence agencies that Iraq had weapons of mass destruction. We know that the Times purveyed false information that was part of a propaganda push to start a war that resulted in the deaths of thousands of people. If this newspaper could do such a thing, how could any thinking or feeling person ever trust it again? To understand how the mainstream media operates and who it works for, one only needs look at the case of the reporter Gary Webb. Webb was an investigative reporter who worked for the San Jose Mercury News. He was a passionate believer in the importance of journalism and in the power of the press to bring corruption to light. In 1996, the Mercury News published Webb's Dark Alliance series of articles, which reported that the CIA was associated with drug smugglers who were smuggling cocaine into American inner cities. According to his articles, the CIA was working with Contra rebels who were smuggling drugs into the U.S. to pay for their war against the Nicaraguan government. The drug smugglers had CIA handlers who had full knowledge of the drug smuggling operation. Webb's articles were released in the early days of the internet and were one of the first instances of information going viral. People around the world were reading Webb's series. The articles began to have an impact with the public, especially in the African American community, which had been devastated by the crack epidemic. As the articles gained traction, the mainstream media went into attack mode. The New York Times, Washington Post, and the LA Times all attacked and attempted to discredit Webb's reporting. The Mercury News was criticized and put under pressure by the larger establishment media outlets. Its management couldn't take the heat and began putting pressure on Webb. Webb was transferred by management to a smaller bureau far from his home and was eventually forced out of his job. However, he continued his work, releasing a book based on his Dark Alliance reporting. He also took a job in Sacramento helping to uncover corruption in the California state government. He had become a legendary figure who is respected by large segments of the public. By leaving newspaper journalism, he had freed himself from the need to earn a salary and continued his work unhindered by the watchful eyes of his former editors. Unfortunately, his work came to an end in 2004 when he was found dead in his apartment with two bullets in his head. The coroner called it a suicide. Despite the attacks from the mainstream media that ended Webb's career at the Mercury News, his reporting on CIA involvement in smuggling cocaine into the United States was vindicated. A later government investigation concluded that CIA assets had smuggled cocaine into the United States with the knowledge of CIA agents. Before his death, Webb wrote an article titled "The Mighty Wurlitzer Plays On" about his belief in journalism and how it had changed after the Dark Alliance series was released. If we had met 5 years ago, you wouldn't have found a more staunch defender of the newspaper industry than me, Webb wrote. I'd been working at daily papers for 17 years at that point, doing no-holds-barred investigative reporting for the bulk of that time. As far as I could tell, the beneficial powers the press theoretically exercised in our society wasn't theoretical in the least. They worked. I wrote stories that accused people and institutions of illegal and unethical activities. The papers I worked for printed them, often unflinchingly, many times gleefully. After these stories appeared, matters would improve. Crooked politicians got voted from office or were forcibly removed. Corrupt firms were exposed and fined. Sweetheart deals were rescinded and grand juries were impaneled. Indictments came down. Grafters were bundered off to the big house. Taxpayers saved money. The public interest was served. Bottom line, if there was ever a true believer, I was one. And then I wrote some stories that made me realize how sadly misplaced my bliss had been. The reason I'd enjoyed much smooth sailing for so long hadn't been as I'd assumed because I was careful and diligent and good at my job. It turned out to have nothing to do with it. The truth was that in all those years I hadn't written anything important enough to suppress. Yep. What happened to Webb is a good illustration of how our media actually works. Reporters are mostly low-paid, overworked, idealistic individuals who truly are trying to serve the public interest. The owners of their organization allow these reporters to uncover corruption on their local city council or on the local police force or in business, or in any other areas where the true power in this country is not concerned. But when the moth flies too close to the flame, as Webb did, it gets burned. The power of the press is then used to suppress information that is deemed to be too harmful to the interest of the international bankers. Make no mistake, the press is beholden to the money power in this country, which is centralized and flows directly from the Fed to the banks to the people in charge of the media. These people have an agenda, and the press is a means for them to fulfill it. The people at the very top of the largest media outlets are often members of the Trilateral Commission and the Council on Foreign Relations, or are else closely associated with these groups. Media moguls and reporters attend the Bilderberg Conference every year, but never divulge what is discussed at that mysterious assemblage of agents for the global plutocracy. To understand their endgame, one only need listen to words of Walter Cronkite during a World Acceptance speech at the World Federalist Association in 1999. Cronkite served as the anchorman for CBS Evening News from 62 to 81 and was often called the most trusted man in America. Each night during an extremely tumultuous time in American history, Cronkite told Americans news in a friendly, paternal, yet authoritative style. He told Americans that President Kennedy had been shot, that Americans had landed on the moon, that the Vietnam War was a lost cause and that President Nixon was a crook. After his retirement from journalism, the World Federalist Association presented him with Norman Cousins' Global Governance Award for his support for a world government. In his acceptance speech, Cronkite told the crowd that when he was starting out in his career, he had been asked to be a spokesman and Washington lobbyist for the cause of world government. He said he had been honored to have been made the offer, but instead he decided to become a reporter. He explained that he had been an advocate of world governance, but his calling had been in the world of journalism. Alright, gonna skip down a bit. Cronkite then went on to tell the crowd about these strong opinions that he kept from his audience while reading them the news. First, we Americans are going to have to yield up some of our sovereignty, he said. That's going to be too many a bitter pill. Today, we must develop federal structures on a global level. To deal with world problems, we need a system of enforceable world law, a democratic world government. He goes on to quote Alexander Hamilton and then frames his calls for the United States to surrender its sovereignty in idealistic American terms of liberty, peace, and justice. He uses American ideals to appeal to so many of us, but twists them around to make it appear as if the American revolutionaries were not fighting for independence, sovereignty, self-rule, and to protect their liberty from tyrants abroad. Instead, Cronkite makes it sound as if the founders had set up a system for the purpose of federalizing the planet to create a world government. Cronkite then quotes a passage from a book by evangelist Pat Robertson about world government being the work of the devil. Well, join me, Cronkite said jokingly. I'm glad to sit at the right hand of Satan, he said. Cronkite's speech was followed up by a speech from Hillary Clinton, who praised Cronkite with the highest flattery for his career as a newsreader. For decades, you told us the way it is, Clinton said, but tonight we honor you for fighting for the way it could be. Clinton's speech was followed by a speech from the actor Michael Douglas. So here you had together one of the country's most influential journalists, the First Lady of the U.S., who went on to become a senator, a presidential candidate, and a Secretary of State, and one of the world's highest paid actors, all speaking to an organization which advocates for the surrender of American sovereignty to a world government. One might think that these are talented people who rose to influential positions who just so happen to hold certain views about world government. However, the opposite is the case. These people were recognized for their talents early on and selected for influential positions because of their views and their willingness to pull a certain agenda. They were selected to be placed in influential positions to promote that agenda. CBS News. Fox News presents itself as being patriotic and attempts to appeal to those who feel a love of country. Yet the founder of Fox News, Robert Murdoch, is a foreigner who took American citizenship at age 54 to satisfy a law that said only American citizens could own television stations. Murdoch is the son of an Australian newspaper owner. As a young man, Rupert had a hand in running his father's newspaper business. Like Dean Singleton, Murdoch began acquiring newspapers in rapid fashion, buying them up and building an Australian newspaper empire. then moving offshore to expand into New Zealand. By 1968, he was buying newspapers in the United Kingdom. His papers use a mix of patriotism, raunchiness, sensationalism, celebrity tabloidism, even nudity to attract large numbers of readers. He then moved into the cable TV business in the UK with Sky Television. By the 1970s, he was buying up newspapers in the US. In the 1980s, he was buying up American television stations. In the 1990s, he had moved into Asia, buying up Hong Kong-based Star TV. Murdoch built his empire with debt. He was given access to a bottomless well of money that he used to buy up media outlets around the world. His creditors saw in him a talent for attracting audiences that were being neglected and felt alienated by the mainstream media. He viewed Murdoch's style as an alternative point of view. But is it? Like the media owners whose media outlets he seemingly opposes, Murdoch is an internationalist through and through. His newspapers and television stations may present themselves as being patriotic wherever they are in
May Allah forgive us all and grant us the tawfiq to be good Muslims. World's largest currency, the dollar, is dying. And we are here with a groundbreaking opportunity amidst these uncertain times. While all Allah, what would happen if we did Musa and Lut? This is frightening. He had warned Pharaoh and the nations of Musa and Lut. This is frightening. Is an azab just around the corner? Astaghfirullah. What would happen if we did not listen to this warning and fix our ways? We will go into the details in a short while, but before that, here is something you need to check out. World's largest currency, the dollar, is dying. And we are here with a groundbreaking opportunity amidst these. Increase your chances of winning the possible airdrop. So, don't lose your chance. Elko, Nevada region in America has been swarmed by locusts. The media has been reporting them as Mormon crickets taking over the whole city. Mormon crickets are a type of locusts. Brothers and sisters, do you identify how similar this situation is to the times mentioned in the Quran when Allah sent warning signs to the Pharaoh and the people of Ad and Musa? This has been clearly mentioned in the Quran. So we sent upon them the flood and locusts and lice and frogs and blood as distinct signs. But they were arrogant and were criminal people. And then in Surah Al-Qamar, Allah says, and the people of Ad and Pharaoh and the brothers of Lut and companions of the thicket, indeed all those groups denied the messengers, so my threat was justly fulfilled. These ayat are frightening, brothers and sisters. Is this a warning for us all? Because when Allah sends an azab, it is not only for the sinners or the ones who disbelieved. It takes everyone with it, even the pious ones. On the other hand, locusts are very important signs in the Islamic history. Quran and Hadith have often used the reference of locusts to send warnings. In this one ayat, Allah depicts the sign of the Day of Judgment, when all men and women and children will be brought up from their graves. And it would look like locusts have taken over the earth and they are crawling over the ground. Their eyes humbled, they will emerge from their graves as if they were scattered locusts. In another prophecy of end of times, mentioned in the Sunan Ibn Majah Hadith, Prophet ﷺ told us that when the Day of Judgment would be near, a huge swarm of locusts will take over the lands of the disbelievers and eat away all their greenery. And then will be the turn of the lands of the Muslims, and after this will come the biggest famine ever. The 3 years of famine when the Dajjal will finally emerge. Narrated by Abdullah bin Umar, Allah's Messenger, peace be upon him, said, The locusts will have a great effect on the livelihood of the people. For in the land of the disbelievers, the locusts will consume all the greenery, and when they fly away, it will be as if nothing had ever grown there. Then the locusts will come to the land of the Muslims and will do the same. So when you see this, take your provisions, for it will be a year of famine. All these hadiths and ayat point toward only one fact. This attack of Mormon crickets is a warning. These locusts will eat away their greenery, and then they will come to the regions of the Muslims. Is this another end of times prophecy coming true? A desert locust swarm can expand to almost 1200 square kilometers in size and pack between 40 and 80 million locusts into a square kilometer. To put this into perspective, this is approximately the size of Sydney and its surrounding areas. In fact, such is their immense quantity that they are responsible for many agricultural disasters that occur all over the world and throughout history. They are also considered pests that feed off of farmers' crops. Allah, in fact, makes mention of locusts being used as a tool to destroy the land of the tyrant Pharaoh. Such is their dangerous impact. Such an attack of locusts in Nevada is probably just a start of a series of them. We should be ready to face other attacks as well. But also, we need to look over our deeds. Are they good enough that if we breathe our last right now, will we be able to face our Creator? Is our faith and zikr strong enough to face the fitna of Dajjal? This is a moment of truth for all of us. May Allah forgive us all and grant us the tawfiq to be good Muslims. World's largest currency.
Well, the US dollar continues its downward trajectory, artificially held up right now by all of this fake money. So there are people out there like, the dollar is fine, while the underlying fundamentals are absolutely collapsing. Just look at Italy over the past few days announcing its intention to want to join and settle transactions using the Russian ruble in the BRICS nations, wanting to move away from the US dollar. They now are added to a list of other countries who are trying to move away quickly from the US dollar to settle transactions. They see the writing on the wall. For all of this and more, we wanted to bring in the CEO of Lear Capital, Kevin Demerit, who follows this very, very closely, obviously knee-deep in the precious metal space, seeing what's happening with gold and silver and watching this destruction of the US dollar. Kevin, great to see you. Welcome back to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me back on, Clayton.
So I want to talk about this expansion of BRICS first, because I think there's this total cognitive dissonance in the United States. Really, the mainstream media is ignoring this story. But here you have major U.S. allies in Europe now saying, U.S. dollar, the time has come and gone. What do you say about this?
Well, I think they're right. You know, a lot of these countries are saying that the U.S. government has weaponized the U.S. dollar against Russia and, with war and political reasons. And they don't want to be stuck in the same situation. They're looking for something that has value, that isn't getting printed left, right, and center. And this BRICS currency has a lot of implications that could absolutely crush the dollar. And I'm going to say one thing. If this happens, it will be the biggest wealth transfer from nation to another nation I think we've ever seen in the history of the world.
Wow. And how do you mean in terms of by moving away from, well, I've heard it in terms of oil transactions, right? So if we take away the amount of oil settled in US dollars, it is an absolute kneecapping of the US economy. And where the wealth then flows is, of course, into Asia, it's into Russia, it's into the Middle East, and away from the US dollar. Is that how you see it transferring?
No, when I first got into this business, I was in international banking. So trade is a big part of how a currency gets valued. So think about this for a second. The BRICS countries want to back this currency, the BRICS currency, by gold, some portion of gold. So let's just say for a second that we're going to trade with the United States and these other countries with just gold. To make a point here, we're just going to use gold. The United States last year had a $960 billion trade deficit. So if we were using gold, we would be $1 trillion less gold in the United States and $1 trillion worth of gold in those other countries, which is exactly what's going to happen if you use this BRICS currency. It's backed by gold. I need to buy the BRICS currency. I need to then give more of the BRICS currency, which is backed by gold, to those countries. They've accumulated gold, and we've lost basically $1 trillion worth of gold. That wealth transfer is the greatest, scheme that these nations could have ever thought of. And think about it: Russia, China, and India, they absolutely love gold. They would love to be able to transfer and use this as an economic unit of transfer, because they're just accumulating the gold and we're losing ours. Brilliant idea, and it crushes the US dollar. Now think about this for a second. It's backed by gold, meaning that if I issue more of that currency, I've got to back more of it by more gold, which pushes the gold price up, which pushes that currency up, and our paper dollar is going to look like crap, and the whole value just absolutely goes away. We will get repatriated back trillions of dollars of US currency back to the United States, and inflation will go through the roof.
Wow.
It's absolutely brilliant.
I hadn't thought of it in those terms before, and you're right. The repatriation. So as China wants to get rid of the greenbacks, saying here we are, we're turning in these U.S. Treasury bonds, we're getting rid of this. All of these countries are getting rid of it, and it's coming back to the United States, and we're sitting there saying, well, this currency is not backed by gold; it's backed by debt. The United States, what is it backed by in the United States? And so now we're sitting on all of this fake paper money, all of this artificially created cash in the United States that's not backed by gold. And then in many ways it becomes worthless. What will it be backed by in the United States? I mean, am I missing something?
No, this ploy by the BRICS countries is absolutely fantastic. We're going to take your gold, we're going to take something of value, and we're going to send you toys and cars and everything that depreciates, and we're going to grab all the real wealth, right? The tangible asset, we're
Right.
going to grab that wealth. But if you take it one step further, I believe that the US government sees this coming, and we better get to a digital currency where we can start manipulating values much easier than we can with the paper side of it. So I think this is just one step closer to, hey, we need to be able to do something with this worthless currency. Let's take away a zero. I mean, countries around the world have done it for years and years and years. So if it gets too bad, a digital currency would be a way to do it easy, where paper, not so much.
No, that's brilliant, and that's what we're moving to. And guys, watching this right now, what Kevin is saying is absolutely spot on. So the reason the Fed is moving towards a digital bank central currency, and they've been doing this slowly. We just heard the details here about how this is going to be rolled out from the banking sector, right? And it was a slow roll. They've been planning this since 2015. Right, we're going to shift over to the central bank digital currency. Everything will be digital. We'll provide perhaps a universal basic income, but we will track everything you do. It will be Fed backed. It will not be from the banks. It'll be Fed backed, an unelected group that's going to be providing you with money. It'll be artificial. It'll be digital. It will not be tied to gold. We can print it as much as we want. We can create as many zeros as we want, because it's all fake. And it's all controlled by the Fed. And that's exactly what we're moving towards.
That's right. It's the perfect thing to do if you believe that the US dollar is going to take a hit by, these countries that want to back, this by gold. And here's what I look for, Clayton, when I invest are tipping points. Where's a tipping point?
Right. And it's important to understand that China has a socialist economic understanding. They educate their population in socialist and like Marxist theories of economics and stuff in like their high schools. And their digital currency is used within China. It's for their people within China,
Point that takes you from one thing to the next. The dot-com happened in 2000, and then it took another 10 years before the internet really.
The official Chinese currency, like the Chinese renminbi, is used in actual international trade, etc. A lot of people, like some Islamic scholars, etc., or even maybe some Christians, believe that gold and currency and silver are God's currency.
Took off. What's happening here with this currency? You're not talking about a country like Tanzania. You're talking about countries that have 3.3 billion people. You've got those 5 countries, India, China, Russia, Brazil, South Africa, 3.3 billion people, 40% of the entire population of the world, and they want to move to this currency. You're getting close to 50% as a tipping point when you start adding in all the other countries like Italy and the European countries that you brought up. You hit 50% of the people that says, I'm done with the US dollar.
Also China, the Chinese government can say, they can pretty much, within banks of China, they can forgive their own debt. Like, they could forgive the debt of the developmental housing bank or whatever, and just write off their debt. Like their mortgage crisis situation, etc., and the bank's getting in trouble. Essentially like what we kind of do to some of our banks is kind of forgive them, except we actually bail them out with, fake money printing instead of just, forgiving the debt. Or so it's kind of just a different way to deal with it. But
there's your tipping point, and you better understand what's going to happen when that happens. When you're no longer the international reserve currency, you're investing, commodities become much more tough to track, and things can get expensive. Inflation in other countries goes through the roof when you don't have that status.
Well, you guys, of course, deal in silver and gold on a regular basis. This is your, but you're also a big fan of real estate, tangible assets. You and I are both on the same page with that. Like, we invest in real estate, we invest in gold, and we invest in silver. Natalie and I are big believers in all 3 of those things. When you see, we see the demand right now. Silver pushing up, I think is over 25 right now, $25. So there's increasing demand. We have, I think we had Bank of America with a price target for gold of like $2,500 an ounce. We're at like $1,900 an ounce. Oh, 3,000. Yeah, 3,000. That's right. Yeah. I was saying 25. Yeah, $3,000 an ounce. So where do you see things happening right now with the supply of gold and silver and the demand for tangible assets like that?
To me, right now, silver is absolutely on sale. Hard to get in big quantities. 2-3 years ago, we could get larger quantities, but since the pandemic, the silver supply has really kind of gone down. And there's a couple of reasons. To me, silver is the best double play investment, that I can find. And what I mean by that is that in a good economy, the silver being used in solar, which is just absolutely skyrocketing. We had about 5% of the silver supply being used in solar in 2015. We're up to 15%, and looks like it's going to go even higher. You have silver and water treatment plants, so solar, water treatment plants, medicine, and all the other industrial applications. So if the economy does well, and we're wrong, then silver demand should still go through the roof, and silver looks inexpensive at $25 an ounce. But if we start having these situations that we're talking about with the dollar, the economy goes into a recession, we already know silver can go to $49 or $50 an ounce, because that's exactly what it did in 2008. So to me, it's just a great investment for a portion of someone's portfolio that can play both sides of the economy at this particular point. There's just not that many investments out there like that.
Yeah, I agree. That's why I'm such a big fan of it. And that's why Natalie and I just made a big purchase of silver a few weeks ago. So absolutely a big play. I know it's going to be really interesting to see what happens with these BRICS nations, how many more start coming forward here and realizing the writing's on the wall, especially after the United States blows up your pipeline and cuts off your energy supply. They've got some rotten friends. Let's just say that. The schoolyard bully is not looking so hot right now. We'll keep our eye on that.
Next video.
Now you talk about terror. What about for me? I've been terrorized all my days. Hammer all my days.
Relatable. Video.
There was once a wing of the Democratic Party that stood up to the war industry. J. William Fulbright, George McGovern, G. McCarthy, Mike Gravel, William Proxmire, of course, Dennis Kucinich. But that was largely decades ago. The new Democrats, especially with the presidency of Bill Clinton, became shills, not only for corporate America, but the arms industry. No weapons system is too costly. No war, no matter how disastrous, goes unfunded. The massive military budget, $858 billion in military spending allocated for fiscal year 2023, is an increase of $45 billion over the Biden administration's budget request and nearly $80 billion more than the amount appropriated by Congress for the current fiscal year. It just keeps growing. When 30 members of the party's Progressive Caucus recently issued a call for Joe Biden to negotiate with Vladimir Putin, they were forced by the party leadership and a warmongering media to back down and rescind their letter. What happened to the Democratic Party? Why has it become impossible to question war and the massive expenditures on arms? Why is such questioning political suicide? Why can't a Democrat ask, especially at a time of economic hardship and huge deficits, how much we are going to divert to the war in Ukraine, which has already consumed some $60 billion, as much as we spend on the State Department and AID, with no end in sight? Joining me to discuss the extinction of the anti-war Democrat is Dennis Kucinich, a former presidential candidate who served 8 terms in the House of Representatives before the Democratic Party gerrymandered his district to ensure his defeat. Dennis, you were consistently one of the very few Democrats who hearkened back to that great era of those I mentioned, McGovern, G. McCarthy, and others, Proxmire, who stood up to the war industry. You paid a very heavy political price for that, not only being pushed out of Congress, but even when you were in Congress. I believe you were not allowed to caucus with the Democrats, if I have that correct, courtesy of Pelosi. But let's go back. There was a moment in time when the Democratic Party had fierce peace candidates, anti-war candidates. Of course, 1972, McGovern becomes the nominee. What happened?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for the opportunity to be on your show. And I think, this is the perfect show for me to do, because it's not just a matter of having a conversation with the choir. It's about taking the discussion to a higher level to try to describe for people what's actually happening, what can happen. With respect to the Democratic caucus, though, I found my way into the meetings.
Uninvited?
because and there wasn't really an attempt to shut me out as much as it was, who brought this guy in. But really, I will say this about Speaker Pelosi, that we may have had a difference of opinion on some of these spending issues that help to fuel wars. But the thing that I always did was I always let the leadership know ahead of time, I don't agree with you. I'm taking a different approach. I'm going to go to the floor. This is what I'm going to say, whether you like it or not. And they appreciated the warning. They didn't appreciate my speeches. I'm sure, didn't appreciate my votes for the most part. But to me, what's happened with the Democratic Party, I think as soon as the Democratic Party made a determination, could have been 35, 40 years ago, that they were going to take corporate contributions, that wiped out any distinction between the two parties. Because in Washington, he or she who pays the piper, plays the tune. And that's what's happened. So there isn't that much of a difference in terms of the two parties when it comes to war, except notably, partisan reasons or not, there were over 50 Republicans who voted against the last tranche of money that went to fuel the war in Ukraine. And I felt that was notable. And of course, the potential Speaker of the House, should the Republicans win, will be Kevin McCarthy, who has made it a point to say that he's going to look at that funding.
Well, let's talk about the past. So you had significant opposition to the Pentagon budget. Weapons systems were questioned. Was it, in essence, corporate money that was the factor in essentially driving Wellstone, driving these figures out of the House and the Senate, or were there other reasons?
Certainly plays a part. I mean, let's face it, right now, the arms industry is making money hand over fist with the expansion of war. That's how they make their money. And of course, they can put money into certain campaigns, but that's not all it's about. The request to fund a war goes into the larger, heavily mediated environment which supports a war. And if you stand against the funding, then your constituents who may be great Americans look at that and they say, well, why aren't you supporting America? And I think that members of Congress are always concerned about being caught betwixt and between on what their constituents think, as opposed to what the doubts that they have. And so with respect to the Democratic caucus, this event of retraction of the letter by a significant caucus within the Democratic Party is a new benchmark of kind of a slavish obeisance to the status quo within the party, which then supports war. And a majority of Republicans at this point are supporting war. So you have Congress supporting a war. And this is the way it's been.
Seymour Melman writes about the distortion of the economy by the war industry. He points out that one of the crucial tactics that the war industry uses is to diversify where weapons are made. I believe F-35s are made in Vermont, and this really ties the hands of House and Senate members because it becomes at a constituent level a debate about jobs.
Well, it is a factor. Can't ignore it. So what happens is when the Pentagon budget comes up, there are a parade of various businesses, small and large, who will make appointments with the Congress person or staff and lay out how many jobs are in the district and how important it is to a district business to have this budget passed. I mean, I had that happen to me, and it was I invariably have to inform my constituent that I didn't support the war that this was going to be fueling, and so I wasn't going to vote for the budget. I will tell you this, Chris, that I may have once, when I first started in Congress, voted for a budget that went to the Pentagon, but it didn't take me long to figure out what the racket was. I had a hearing I went to as a member of the Government Oversight Committee in which an inspector general testified that there were over $1 trillion worth of accounts in the Pentagon that couldn't be reconciled, that they had over 1,100 different accounting systems, deliberately, I suppose, constructed so as to make obfuscation a rule of the day. So from that moment on, I just said, wait a minute, they're not keeping track of how this money's spent. Why in the world should I vote for this budget? So from that point on, right through to the conclusion of a 16-year service in the United States Congress, I didn't vote for a single budget of the Pentagon or any of the supplemental appropriations to keep wars going, because I knew it was a racket. I knew there would be billions of dollars thrown away. And, I can cite chapter and verse, Inspector General's reports. Once the money goes out of this country, overseas, on behalf, whether it's Iraq or whatever adventure we were in, the money's blowing. The thing that I was always concerned about, even more than the money, was the fact that we were committing American servicemen and servicewomen, in the case of Iraq, to a lie. And the constituency that I had in Congress, Chris, primarily working class men and women, many veterans halls, people really believe strongly in America, serve the country themselves, or their fathers and grandfathers served, and they support the United States of America. So I'm in Congress and I'm seeing what actually is going on, and I'm going, wait a minute, I'm not a sucker, and I'm looking at this and I'm saying, no, this is wrong. And then I have to go home and explain my vote. And I had some people who were unhappy because they thought I wasn't being patriotic enough. And that's what a congressperson is supposed to do. But the truth is, the members of Congress are always under enormous pressure, not, locally from their constituents, from contractors within their constituency, from the mediated environment and the party. And so it's a rare individual. And I'm not, doing this to elevate myself, but it's a rare individual who will go against that because you risk, at times you may risk your political career.
Well, if you won't take their money, there's always someone else who will, and they will throw a lot of that money at a candidate to take you down.
Well, that's true no matter if you're talking about the arms industry, the oil companies, the healthcare industry. There was a congressional candidate in 1972 who ran against a darling of the AMA. And he told the AMA when they came to him is, look, give the other guy the money because I'm not going to help you. Well, they did. And this young congressional candidate lost a close race. That was me, by the way. So I understand the price that you might have to pay for not going with the crowd. But my feeling is that public office comes and goes. I mean, if who are we if we won't take a stand? Who are any of us if we're not willing to put it all on the line in any given vote and say, look, this isn't only what I believe in, this is who I am. And I'm someone who I don't feel I know more than anybody else. I do my homework, Chris. I make sure that any vote that I take is informed. And as I did when I led the effort against the war in Iraq. And that's not the way it goes in Congress. A lot of people are flying by the seat of their pants, or they look at the vote board to see how everyone else is voting. Because Congress is a place of tremendous peer pressure. And the votes go right up on this. Most people don't know this, but the votes are imagine a big gym, and the votes go up on this big wall.
Yeah, little children.
And people, the lights go on, green light for yes, yellow light for I'm not sure, and red light for no. And everybody can see how everybody else is voting. It helps enforce party discipline, and it helps it helps to feed the herd instinct inside the Congress. There's a lot of pressure there.
Let's talk about the effect of unchecked militarism on our civil society and our democracy.
Well, we live in a time where there's an acceleration of polarized thinking. It's us versus them, whoever they are. And the government helps to feed that. The government generates perceptions. And people
generates perceptions.
Think, well, there must be a reason for this.
It's not only here; it's abroad as well. Twitter, Facebook, all these things. Censorship.
For the government.
People saying, "Oh, if you don't support the war, you're or whatever." Just talking about Putin, talking points and things, and it's all, whatever.
Government's position on this war. The truth of the matter is that we're in heavily militarized society driven by greed, lust for profit, and wars are being created just to keep fueling that. And it moves right into this idea of this old idea of a manifest destiny. And then you kind of leap into the 21st century, where there are still people who believe, as in the Project for a New American Century, that it has to be that America must rule the world, that it is our destiny. I mean, that is such old thinking, but that's where we are. And we don't always consider that we're inheritors not only of a physical world, but we're inheritors of a consciousness. We're inheritors of thought structures. And the thought structures that we've inherited no longer serve a practical purpose in this country. We moved into a false consciousness of fear, of separation from the rest of the world. See, I see the world as one. I think that human unity is the truth that surrounds all of us. And when we start separating ourselves and we engage in this polarized thinking is a precursor of war. And so we need to try to go back to, it's really a spiritual principle that says that, look, we're all one. We're interconnected. We're interdependent. And the world is one. We may have different races, colors, creeds, but there's a oneness.
Tahid.
And if you look at the first motto of the country, E pluribus unum, out of many, one. It's the paradox of unity in multiplicity. And many people can't handle that, but that's the truth. So when we go to war, we're living a lie. We're separating ourselves from part of humanity. It's a belief that we don't have an ability to be able to solve things, and somehow the power of our weapons is greater than the power of our reason, or even deeper, the power of our heart. And so that's where, I've gone away from the orthodoxy, which is now part of politics, that says, well, keep that war going. And for whatever reason, we're going to beat the Russians. We're going to beat the Chinese. What? We're beating ourselves.
To what extent are these conflicts, and I would include the expansion of NATO, driven by this lust for greed on the part of the war industry and the arms manufacturers?
When I was in Congress, I put in legislation to forbid the United States to go into any war that NATO was operating, because I felt that it was a subversion of the constitutional principle in Article 1, Section 8, which says that Congress of the United States has the power to take our country from a condition of peace to war. That was in the Constitution. NATO has evolved. It was first a defensive organization. Then after Clinton, it turned into an offensive organization. And it has become now a kind of a sock puppet for Western powers, notably my own dear country, the United States. And as a result, NATO punches above its weight, makes statements that are ridiculous. And look, I will make a prediction right here that as a result of NATO and the EU's role in helping to fuel this war in Ukraine, give it a couple years, but there won't be a NATO and there won't be an EU as a result.
Why?
Well, first of all, look at what's happened. The U.S. actually, I think the way this unfolded in Ukraine, we all know from 2014 how the U.S. engineered a coup and knocked out the Ukrainian government and put in one that would serve the U.S. interest, which was to nullify the power of the constituency in eastern Ukraine, which was Russian speaking. And they wanted to basically, by any means necessary, keep that out of influencing the policies of the region, in which they did. I mean, 14,000 by some estimates Russian-speaking Ukrainians were killed from 2014 until 2021. Most Americans have no idea about that. But anyhow, once the U.S. Once the intelligence started to say, "Hey, we can knock Russia out like that," okay? We'll crush Russia economically. These sanctions are going to put Russia away. And the EU bought into it. What's the result? Well, the war goes on. But in the meantime, the sanctions have created a dramatic increase in the cost of energy. Plus, they blew up the pipeline. That's another increase in the cost of energy. So I've heard from people in Europe where they're seeing increases in basic energy costs anywhere from 6 to 9 times of what it used to be. Businesses can't survive that. Individuals are under hardship. The pressure is going to go back on the government. This is going to cause a lot of problems with the EU. And NATO is there as, a cat's paw for war. And frankly, people are going to say, well, who's NATO making decisions for me? I would imagine that already you're starting to see protests in Europe where people are saying, get out of the EU, get out of NATO, because they're paying an economic price right now for the misjudgment of the European officials who were coaxed into it by the U.S. And this ends up being a nightmare, not only for Europe, though, but we're getting visited with it somewhat here. You're seeing an increase in food prices, increases in gas prices, the accelerant knock-on effect on inflation. Interest rates have gone up, mortgage rates are gone up. There's a cycle of economic violence which is visited on the people of this country who really don't have a straight story about what happened in Ukraine. I represented Ukrainians in the United States Congress, and proudly so. I went to Ukraine. I met with people. I stood in the square in Ukraine in defense of journalists who were under attack there, one of whom was killed, Gonzaga. And so I just felt that, Ukrainians have a right to exist. They have a right to their own country. And what's happened is this is being twisted, and suddenly Ukraine becomes a bloodbath of a chessboard where these innocent people are just being used as pawns in a game of nations. And I resent that. I mean, I resent that on behalf of every decent person who's trying to keep their family together in Ukraine and who doesn't want to be dominated by anybody, U.S., Russia, anybody, and they just want to live their lives. But because there's a game of nations going on, and the U.S. was concerned about Russia's pivot to Asia, well, guess what? This whole thing is blowing up in the face of the West. Russia's not, we forced Russia to pivot to Asia. And now, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, then Saudi Arabia. There's a whole new world being formed. And the catalyst of it is the misjudgment that occurred about Ukraine and the effort to try to control Ukraine that began in 2014, that most people aren't aware of, I would say.
Let's talk about the press, because you spoke about going back to your constituents.
He talks about the inflation, but he didn't mention also the Federal Reserve printing, trillions and trillions of dollars starting in 2020 during the pandemic. And he also doesn't mention the United States, militarily, how we are kind of expended. Also, what have been otherwise if we didn't have, such a war industry that has spent 20 years in Afghanistan, just, coming out of Iraq, etc. And, also the deindustrialization that took place in America by our politicians are often war-hungry politicians and neoliberals, especially starting in the 1980s and onwards. So how are we going to, they can't even keep up with Russia. wouldn't be able to win a conventional war against Russia, nonetheless against Russia and China.
As an anti-war candidate and feeling blowback as an anti-war candidate and feeling blowback.
That we should
but
even
isn't that
such
because
things.
essentially we have a press that is locked out
Insane.
anti-war critics?
Well, I think it was a librarian of Congress, Daniel Borston, who wrote a book about the media being spear carriers for the government. And that was true generations ago, and it's true today. And that's a problem. When you don't have when you don't have many alternatives that present a different point of view, you're locked into a worldview that might be based on a falsity. And I'll give you a great example. Go back to Iraq, because I was really involved in that, in challenging the narrative right from the beginning. And, I did my homework. I saw that and I gave Congress a memo on October 2nd, 2002, that said, look, there's no proof that Iraq has weapons of mass destruction. Moreover, Iraq didn't have anything to do with 9/11, with Al-Qaeda's role in 9/11, didn't have the intention or capability of attacking the United States. So what is this about? And I talked to hundreds of members of Congress about it. But the drumbeat in the media, war, 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 from the White House, war, war, war. No one bothered, and this is what so many people heard. It was just drowned out. And so, I've seen this dynamic before. And the media, we have a heavily mediated society, even more so today than 20 years ago. And we also know that the government can have legions of people working computers, sending out messages that praise those who are for the war and attack those who aren't. We're living in a hall of mirrors here when it comes to trying to find out what is really going on. And so how do you figure it out? Well, you do your homework, but you also have to trust your gut, your intuition too. And when I looked at what happened in Iraq, that led me to understand what was happening in Libya, what was happening in Syria, and then I do some more homework. William Blum, Chalmers Johnson, and others who did the studies, case after case after case, of U.S. interventions that were all about lies. And our country, I love this country, and it is being it's being done a disservice by people who in power, who have made book with interest groups, who are going forward just to cash in on war.
All these military actions
and I think it's horrific. And in this case, Chris, we're playing with the flash of World War III. There are sometimes I think that people in the White House are like something out of the Sorcerer's Apprentice. They're playing with they've taken this broom and they're moving out chemical forces around that are going beyond that can easily go beyond their control. And so I'm also concerned that things could spin out of control even now with respect to Russia, with respect to China, North Korea. And what a tragedy. What an immense human tragedy when the truth of the matter is we must find a way to live together. As John Kennedy said, we have to, learn how to live together as brothers and sisters, or we perish together as fools.
I want to ask about these pimps of war, these shills for war. I covered the war in El Salvador. I had to deal with Elliot Abrams. Robert Kagan worked for him. They're wrong about everything. They were wrong about the interventions in Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria with the so-called moderate rebels, Libya. And now they're beating the drums, of course, for endless war with Ukraine. It doesn't matter how mistaken they were in the past. They are perpetuated. Their think tanks are perpetuated. They never lose their perches on the cable talk shows. You've dealt with these people. I know some of them, Abrams and others. They are truly human mediocrities. And I would include the generals like Petraeus and others. And yet they're like this bacteria or anti-resistant bacteria that we can't vanquish. Talk about them.
Well, Chris, I see the way I look at it is that even people with whom I strongly disagree, and you just named a number of them, I think we have to continue to find ways of showing people, they've gone astray, and that we have to make an effort to bring them back. Now, how do you do that? Well, if there ever was a country that was in need of a process of truth and reconciliation, it's America. We really need to have people come forward and admit that they were wrong, that, whatever their motivation was, so that we can heal this country, because we're divided right now in this whole idea about war and, this misuse of power. In some ways, a misunderstanding of the material world itself, that we think there's only so much and we have to control it. If you look at physics, the material world, the universe keeps expanding. But you wouldn't know that talking to some people, because their physics is a very confined, almost Galileo view of the world.
Dennis, I just want to, just on the last 2 minutes, you talked about truth and reconciliation. There was a certain amount of accountability after the Vietnam War. We did, as a country, ask questions about ourselves that we hadn't asked before, and there was a brief period of time when I would argue we became a better country. Now there's no accountability. I spent 7 years in the Middle East. Millions of people's lives were destroyed, not to mention the tens of thousands of families in the United States who are caring for wounded and crippled veterans or lost loved ones, but there's no accountability at all.
This is, we must find a path to accountability, or it will be our undoing. I made an attempt to follow a procedure, which is one way of achieving accountability through the legislative process, and that is that I introduced articles of impeachment of the president and the vice president.
I was with you at the Cannon Building when you did that.
You remember that? And
yes, of course.
And there were at least 48 articles with respect to President Bush, and a smaller number for Vice President Cheney. The Democratic leadership, however, sent that to those proposals to committee, never to be discussed. See, when I got on the floor of Congress, and I gave hundreds of speeches opposed to the war, and after the war started, and proposals to get out of Iraq, and other speeches to not go to war against Iran, and each time there was a kind of amnesia that took place, what Gore Vidal calls the United States of amnesia. It just takes place where people forget the mistakes, not mistakes, the misdeeds of the past, and unless we have some measure of accountability, we're always going to be wearing the stain of war waged against innocent people around the globe. And there's a point, Chris, where we have to start asking ourselves, what are we about as a nation? Are we about endless war, about being king of the mountain, about telling other nations how they should live? Or wouldn't it be nice to start focusing on the education of our people, put the resources into education and healthcare and job creation and safe cities and a cleaner environment and all those things that we can do within the boundaries of what we know as the United States of America? To me, politically, it never made sense to just go all over the world, but with the media, it's been, and that was the area of study I had at university. With the media, it's always been pounding away at, America has to be the vanguard of freedom for the world, and we're losing it here at home.
Yeah, well, we have to stop there. We should also be clear we've lost almost all these wars going back to Vietnam, including Afghanistan and Iraq. That was Dennis Kucinich, former presidential candidate, served 8 terms in the House of Representatives before the Democratic Party pushed him out. I want to thank the Real News Network and its production team, Cameron Granadino, Adam Coley, and Kayla Rivera. You can find me at chrisedges.substack.com.